Yeah, he and I have talked about this quite a bit, as you might imagine, over the last few months, determining the pros and cons of the two different strategies. I respect Lindsey Graham and all my friends who kind of preferred a two-step strategy. The idea would be get something done on the border and maybe defense spending right out of the blocks very quickly in what we would call a skinny reconciliation bill, and then do the rest of it in a larger chunk later. But I think at the end of the day, President Trump is going to prefer, as he likes to say, one big, beautiful bill. And there's a lot of merit to that because we can put it all together, one big up or down vote, which can save the country, quite literally, because there are so many elements to it.
Mic check.
And it'll give us a little bit more time to negotiate that and get it right. That doesn't mean that we won't come right out of the gates, full-fledged, right out of the beginning of the...
Come, you gotta, we'll make it, want to make a YouTube short. Here, you want to make a YouTube short? All right. First of all, we'll do this. Okay, come here. You have 27. Here, sit down. Hey, have you ever been on YouTube before?
Yeah.
Okay, you got 27 seconds. That's annoying. Don't just do that. People don't want to listen to that. Say something that people do something entertaining.
Do you guys like water bottles?
Maybe. Why?
Like plastic water bottles?
No, why?
Do you like Stanley's?
Yes.
Okay.
That's all you got?
Bye! Winga, winga, winga. Winga, winga, winga.
Oh, here, let me. We'll make a clip. We can. Do you want to see your clip?
Yeah.
Okay, here. Put the headphones on.
Oh, everyone, wait. Okay. No water bottles. So Blue Mountain. Eric sucks. And he's not my dad. Do you guys like water bottles?
Maybe. Why?
Like plastic water bottles?
No, why?
Do you like Stanley's?
Yes.
Okay.
That's all you got?
Bye! Wait, no, I didn't hear like the first part. Wait, did you clip off? Like when I first...
Here, yeah, you only get 27 seconds. See, this is the beginning.
Do you guys like water bottles? Well, then I want the screaming part.
Why? That's the worst part, anyway.
First off, how dare you say boo to me?
Is that the Eric? Are you talking to Eric?
Yeah, Eric, you suck. No one likes you, and you probably have a receding hairline.
No more roasting. He's a mod. He's a mod. See how he's got the sword next to his name?
Yeah, and the 12.
Yeah, the sword and the 12 mean he's a mod. Crazy Noodles, what up?
Shut up.
Congress. And so we'll be addressing border. We've got a number of bills just over the next 2 weeks, Maria, that we're going to address the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. I think that there's some things that are so common sense that we've got to fix on the border. We might even be able to get some Democrats.
All right. Mountain Mermaid, out of here. I got to stream the Sunday shows. Unless you wanted to read together. Did you want to read together?
No, I just want...
You don't want to?
I think that's a typo
Get
for
off
both.
the stream, you won't. You know what that is?
No.
Do you know what a goat is?
Yeah, the greatest of all time.
Yeah, so what's a woat?
Worst of all time?
Yep.
You could not be talking. You are so ugly that even like if you were the trophy at the end of a race, I would walk backwards. Like that's how ugly you look. So you can shut up. And we're here for your dad, stepdad. You dingleberry. Eric, like what are you from like the 2000s or something? Like why you? What? I think an 80-year-old man is watching you, Dave or Slitcher fan.
Yeah, you. Okay, fail. No, that was funny. I got some more clips. I'll show you the YouTube shorts later.
Okay, but you had to send them to me.
Okay, well, bye.
No, I'm not leaving.
Hey, do you want to read together?
Nope, I want to roast Eric.
You can either read or you gotta leave.
I have to read the chat. He's not typing and I'm getting upset.
Get off the stream, you wote. He did see. He said, "I am the chat. Get off the stream, you wote."
Eric getting the heat. LOL.
Okay, I'm trying to. I need the stream.
So, we want you gone. Like your hairline?
We want you gone like your hairline. Okay, no more roasting.
No, it's fine. You want lecture.
Yeah, they want me.
But I'm more entertaining.
You're too young. You're a kid. Okay, when you're ready to read or hang out, we can. Until then, I'm streaming. You can have a little bit more time if you want, since you went outside.
Oh, yay! Mountain Moon is an evil communist
votes on some of that
Democrat.
legislation. But we'll pass it out of the House and send it over to the Senate and get it ready for when President Trump takes office on January 20th. We have a lot to do and a short amount of time to do it in.
So if you are doing everything or most of the priorities in one big, beautiful bill, as you say, that includes what? Walk us through what that would include.
Well, it'll have a lot of pieces. We made a lot of campaign promises. President Trump did as well. And reconciliation is the way to get it done. Why? Because you avoid a 60-vote threshold in the Senate. So reconciling the budget, which we will pass in early February, is how we'll get all of our committees involved, committees of jurisdiction on all these big issues. What are they? Well, obviously, we have to secure the border. We've got to make sure that our Border Patrol agents and our immigration enforcement agencies have the right directives from the White House, but also the right resources to do their job and secure that border once and for all. We've got to take care of the dangerous illegal criminals who have come over, and all that's part of it as well. And we've got to shift immediately to the economy. Maria, you talk about every day. We've got to revive the U.S. economy, and we can. We know how to do it. Part of that is preventing the largest tax increase in U.S. history, which would happen automatically at the end of next year if we don't get our ducks in a row. So we're going to make sure that happens. We're going to incentivize American companies to manufacture in the U.S. again.
Wasn't that funny, Eric? Yeah, that was funny. Looks like a future streamer. Oh, Jack Attack. She absolutely wants to be a streamer. Absolutely.
And
that's everything I can do to keep her off. Danger, what's up?
Make sure that
I agree.
Regulatory burden and the red tape that has smothered our free market is reduced and eliminated. And we're going to be dismantling the deep state all along the way. We're going to restore American energy dominance. So many different pieces to this, Maria. They all have to work together. And, of course, the president has asked us and really needs us to address the debt limit crisis before that hits in June. So a lot of moving pieces, a lot of things to negotiate, a lot of opinions on all that. So we'll be working long hours with whiteboards, making sure every Republican is on board, because remember, I'll be dealing with the smallest margin in U.S. history for.
So in other words, he has no idea what's going to happen.
That. So are you expecting to raise or eliminate the debt ceiling as part of that big bill?
I think we're going to have to do it in that bill. And the reason for that, Maria, a very thoughtful discussion and debate about where that limit should go. But here's the important thing everybody needs to remember. We're the team that wants to cut spending, and we will. And we will do it dramatically. All the wasteful spending in government. DOGE will be doing its effort in coordination with all this. But you have to raise the debt limit on paper so that we don't frighten the bond markets and the world's economy. You know how that works. It's about the stability of our economy. But we don't intend to spend to that limit, as President Trump will clarify all the time. We're going to raise the ceiling, but we are going to be cutting all along the way, so we can do both of those things simultaneously.
So, Mr. Speaker, if you are able to do everything in one package, including border security, deportations, extending the tax cuts, and energy permitting, what's a realistic timeline on that? Would you have that on the president's desk by May?
Certainly by May, yes. In fact, we're targeting a vote in the House maybe in the first week of April. Now, everything's got to move in the right sequence, and along the way, I think we're going to keep those trains moving in the right direction and on time. And if that happens, we'll get it out of the House in early April, maybe as soon as April 3rd. And then move it over to the Senate. No. That would put that bill on the president's desk for signature by the end of April. That would be fantastic.
So you're talking about the first 100 days?
In a worst-case scenario, Memorial Day.
You're talking about the first...
That's the whole idea.
Yeah. And the worst case, you say, will be Memorial Day.
That's right. That's right.
Dude, that's awesome, Moon Reaper. Good. We should all be getting more political ads. Frankly, honestly, dude, this is a long game. Politics is a lifelong thing. We're gonna all have to be fighting our entire lives to try to keep our freedom. And so, yeah, we did a good 2024. That's just the beginning. Good for you, Moon Reaper.
I guess there's a fear.
And we'll do it as quickly as possible. Yeah.
And I guess there's a fear that without getting all of the elements in one place, you could lose some members, right? There are some members that have priorities in taxes. They want the SALT deduction back in place. Those New York lawmakers, do you lose those lawmakers on the border if the tax issues are not in that one bill? Is that the fear?
Well, actually, that's the benefit of doing it all together, because no one's going to love every element of a large package like that. But there'll be enough elements in there to pull everyone along. They'll be able to justify not getting all of their preferences on some of their big issues, because there'll be so many other very important pieces to that one piece of legislation. So I think keeping it together is how we'll actually get it done, and there's some real value to that.
Correct, Panzer.
Mr.
Correct.
Speaker,
yeah.
Let me get your take on where this is going in terms of the impact. People need to see an impact on the economy, right, in order to feel the secure.
In this to deliver relief to the American people. And the Bidenomics inflation has just utterly destroyed American families and their own budgets at home. The cost of living is out of control, and we know how to address it. Remember, we did this in the first Trump administration. We brought about the greatest economy in the history of the world before COVID because we reduced taxes and we reduced regulations. That's the basic formula. But the sooner that we do it, the better, as you say, Maria. So
endlessly, what's up, Bono? How ridiculous.
That's why.
Yeah, you are, Eric. Literally, Eric, you were literally bullying a 10-year-old girl.
We're going to be so aggressive about getting this through in the first 100 days because we'll begin to see the effects of the economy very quickly. And that will be important for the midterm elections in 2 years. You know, the historical trend is once a new president is elected, his party almost always loses seats in the House in the first midterm election for lots of different reasons. But we believe we can defy that historic trend because we're going to deliver on this agenda.
And in terms of the money for the border, is the $100 billion the number that you've come up with in terms of what is needed to secure that border?
Well, it's such an enormous task because so many millions and millions of illegals have been allowed over that border. And by the way, a number of very dangerous persons with terrorist cells, we think, set up probably all over the country. We'll talk about that later. But it's going to take a lot of resources to get this done right. We believe we can move some money around in the early part of the year in existing accounts. And we're talking with Russ Vought at the Office of Management and Budget and everyone involved, our new cabinet secretaries, about that. But then we'll have to replenish those funds clearly. So if we do that in the first 3 or 4 months of the Congress, we'll be able to get the resources necessary to secure the border and protect the American people. That's what they demand and deserve, and it is long overdue, Maria.
Mr. Speaker, tomorrow the Congress is expected to certify the 2024 election, January 6th. Can you tell us what to expect?
Well, I hope we have full attendance. We got a big snowstorm coming to D.C., and we encourage all of our colleagues, do not leave town, stay here, because, as you know, the Electoral Count Act requires this on January 6th at 1 p.m. So whether we're in a blizzard or not, we are going to be in that chamber making sure this is done. Listen, President Trump had a mandate, a landslide, you know, so many electoral votes, and we get to count them all, and we cannot delay that certification. He deserves that. 77 million Americans voted for President Trump in this agenda, almost 75 million for the House. That's our highest number ever. So we call it a mandate. I believe it is, and we got to get to work beginning.
No, endlessly. I'd rank him top 5 worst ever.
Immediately on Monday.
And Speaker, before you go, a word on New Orleans and now new worries over terrorism. Does that impact the agenda? And what can you tell us about your constituents this morning in New Orleans?
Well, you know, this event has really shaken my home state of Louisiana and really people all over the country, because it's another reminder that under 4 years of the Biden administration and Department of Homeland Security and the agencies that are in charge of keeping us safe, they took their eye off the ball. They were not prioritizing enough going with how much this was involved with an open border, whether some of the materials used, et cetera, came over that way. But we do know that this is something that reminds us again that the new Trump nominees for these important positions need to be in place as quickly as possible. We're in a dangerous situation in the country. All the red lights are flashing, as FBI Director Chris Wray testified himself to Congress multiple times, and we have to take this threat seriously. New Orleans was a very sad and tragic reminder of that.
It sure was. Mr. Speaker, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We'll be watching your work.
Thanks, Maria. God bless.
All right. Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, thank you. And now this.
I am saying we need a reconciliation bill that has border, energy, permitting, and tax. You put all four of those things together, we can deliver on that. In fact, in the House, we have been working for months, Maria, in preparation for this large omnibus bill. We need to deliver this win as early as possible to President Trump. And Maria, what everyone needs to pay attention to is Congress has not passed 2 reconciliation bills into law since 1997 when Newt Gingrich was Speaker. And guess what? They had a much larger majority. And you know what? The House of Representatives majority is 220 to 215, and we'll be at 217 to 215 in just a few weeks. We have a smaller margin than what the United States Senate does. It is harder to pass bills in the House than it is in the Senate.
Is there a risk that a second reconciliation bill doesn't happen at the end of the year?
Absolutely. That is what I've been sounding the alarm the whole time.
And that was House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Jason Smith with me last month on Mornings with Maria, echoing what appears to be what President Trump wants, as you just heard from the Speaker, Mike Johnson. That is one large reconciliation package within the first half of the year, perhaps to be on President Trump's desk by the end of April, to include border security, deportations, energy permitting, and tax extensions, all in one package, as opposed to 2 reconciliation bills, which was what my next guest was planning. Joining me now with the agenda and the man writing legislation, helping to set that agenda in the Senate, is South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee. Senator, great to see you this morning. Thanks so much for being here. You heard Mike Johnson and what President Trump wants. Can you get it done?
I'm very worried. I'm very worried that if we don't put border first and get it done, it's going to be a nightmare for our national security. We've got millions of illegal immigrants that President Trump has promised to deport, and he should. Why are we doing mass deportation? Because we had mass illegal immigration. Laken Riley's murderer was released because there was no bed space to hold him, and he was paroled, and he raped and killed the girl. Right now, we have 41,000 beds. Under the Trump plan, we're going to go to 150,000 beds. We're going to double the number of ICE agents to find people and kick them out. We're going to finish the wall and with cuts in other places. But there's no way in hell Democrats are going to give us $100 billion for mass deportation. Every day we delay is a dangerous day for America. 3,000 Americans die from fentanyl poisoning every 2 weeks. I've never seen so many threats to our nation as I do now. It started with Afghanistan. ISIS is on the move. They're coming here. Last year, we found 8 people from Tajikistan that were affiliated with ISIS. I wrote a letter to Schumer saying, let's have a hearing about ISIS-K in Afghanistan. He blew me off for an entire year. Now he wants a hearing about New Orleans. The threats to our nation are large. I want the tax cuts. They're $4.7 trillion. They will ruin the economy if they expire at the end of the year. I will try to be a team player here, but I want to tell the American people, from my point of view, the #1 job is to secure the nation for the federal government. Our border is broken. I wanted it fixed by February the 17th. To the tax cut wing of the party, I am with you, but if you hold border security hostage to get tax cuts, you're playing Russian roulette with our national security.
And isn't therein the point right there, Senator? Because if you don't get everything all in one bill, don't you lose some members? You just said it yourself. The Democrats are not going to vote for $100 billion for the border.
No
so isn't
way
that important
in hell.
that you link taxes with border and energy?
Well, here's what I'm saying. I'm saying that as we negotiate tax cuts, there are tax-cutting people, and I'm one of them, that won't vote for border until they get all their taxes. I'm not a big fan of the SALT deduction. I live in South Carolina where we have low taxes. Why should people in South Carolina subsidize California and New York tax policy? You're going to have a hard time with me on that. What does President Trump want the most? To make us safe and prosperous. How many times did he talk about a broken immigration system on the campaign trail? For every time he talked about taxes, he talked about broken illegal immigration 10 times. I know where his heart is. This is a political problem. We have to do it all together because we have a political problem. We have a national security problem. I am hoping that Mike Johnson, who is the right man for the job, I am so glad he got to be Speaker. He's a wonderful man. I hope he can do this by May. But here's what I want America to understand. Every day that we don't deport a violent criminal is another day that we're exposed to their actions. Every day we don't shut down that border is another day for terrorists to come in. And every day we delay in combating the fentanyl problem, 3,000 Americans die every 2 weeks. So count me in for cutting taxes. But my purpose on this show today is to warn Americans that this broken border is a national security nightmare. Donald Trump has a plan to fix it. It costs $100 billion. If we can get him the money, that's all he needs to fix it for 4 years. Yeah. No Democrat is going to help us, folks. If you think they're going to help us, you shouldn't be allowed to drive.
Well, I understand all of that for sure, but can't some of these things that you're envisioning that will belong in this first reconciliation package, can't that be done by executive order? I mean, I'm being told that one of the first executive orders that President Trump is going to issue is to freeze all pending rulemaking. Freeze all pending, and then can he get executive orders on permitting there and perhaps something else on energy?
Sure.
Why must it all be there in the first package?
He needs money to hire ICE agents. You can't do that by executive order. We have a bill funding the government that expires March 16th. There's no new money available. We're operating under a continuing resolution. We need to increase military spending dramatically. We have the lowest amount being spent on the military in the last 80 years. We have 296 ships. The Chinese are going to have 440. Trump wants more ships. Well, you need money to do this, but we also need to cut the government. I'm promising you, as budget chairman, we're going to find hundreds of billions of dollars with Ron Johnson and others of wasteful spending. Yeah. So when we do the $100 billion for border security, we're going to offset it by cutting other parts of the government. We can do that. I will support whatever gets us over the line, but I am worried about delay when it comes to border security.
Senator,
delay equals danger.
I'm going to get into that with Senator Ron Johnson. Real quick on these cabinet nominations.
So the way I'm understanding the debate is basically like Lindsey Graham is saying, hey, let's do the border first and get that across the finish line. And Trump and everybody else saying, no, let's get everything done right away. And the concern is if you just do the border now, well, then you might not get that other stuff done later. That's the issue. And Lindsey Graham really didn't have an answer for that. Lindsey Graham basically kind of saying, yeah, I'll help you on like taxes and these other issues later, like if we can get those. And it's like, no, this isn't an if thing.
Look, Giorgia Meloni, Prime Minister of Italy, in Mar-a-Lago this weekend with President Trump. No doubt talking about the threats on the global stage. What are your thoughts here in terms of the terrorism element and getting President Trump's national security team in place? Do you have confidence that all of his cabinet nominees will be confirmed?
Yeah, I do, and I want to do them sooner rather than later. When President Trump left office, we had the most secure border in American history. The caliphate was destroyed, ISIS was destroyed, and Iran was in a box. We killed Soleimani, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard leader. The last 4 years have been a friggin' disaster. They rolled back every policy that worked on the border. They went back into the Iran nuclear agreement, giving the Ayatollah hundreds of millions of dollars as used for terrorism. Yeah, the confirmations, do them now, do them quick. Get them all done in January, February. We need our team on the field. We need an FBI director. We need an attorney general. We need them all. Get it done. We got to get it done.
So
we're under attack here. We're at war.
So you're prepared to vote for all of Trump's nominees then?
I am ready to go. Bring them up. I'll vote. Let's get it done.
Senator, it's great to see you this morning. You make a lot of really important points. We're going to please come back soon. We want to talk more about that.
I love Lindsey Graham pretending to be really tough, pretending to be super tough.
Reconciliation package.
Pro Trump, pro MAGA.
Welcome back. We just heard from newly elected Speaker Mike Johnson telling us in his first stress test over the weekend to secure the votes Friday when Congressman Ralph Norman and Keith Self switched their votes to Johnson following a conference call with President Trump. The sole no vote remained Thomas Massie against Speaker Johnson. But what Speaker Johnson just told us in breaking news is that President Trump wants all of the priorities in one bill, and he is expecting to put that bill on the president's desk at the end of April. Worst case scenario, Memorial Day. Joining me now on whether this is a sign of a battle to come in executing President Trump's agenda, given that slim majority, is Florida Congressman Byron Donalds, a key member of the House Oversight Committee. Congressman, it's great to see you this morning. Thanks so much for being here.
It's good to be with you, Maria. Good morning, everybody.
So you just heard the back and forth. Mike Johnson says he's going to have a bill with energy permitting, the border, as well as tax extensions on President Trump's desk by the end of April. Lindsey Graham just said he's worried it's likely not going to happen that way.
Well, look, there's going to be a big lift, a lot of stuff that has to go into this bill. I'm not really going to get caught into whether it's one bill or two bill. I think the job right now is specifically in the House is putting together the overall package. And then your political dynamics, your dynamics on Capitol Hill, the calendar in the House, the calendar in the Senate, that will largely dictate what this ends up looking like. We use this phrase on Capitol Hill often. You have to build the plane while it's in the air. That's what you're about to see. And so, yes, tax policy, yes, energy policy. The DOGE work from Vivek and Elon is going to be a major part of this. There's going to have to be reforms to some pieces of mandatory spending. And I want to be clear, we are not touching Medicare. We are not touching Social Security. But there are other parts of mandatory spending. There's going to have to be some reforms. There's going to have to be some cuts. And so when you put all that stuff together with border security, which is going to be central to all of this, just like tax policy, we can deliver it. It's just working through the finer points and details with
So you're not gonna touch the main things that are driving our deficits and our debts? All right, okay.
Colleagues in the House and frankly also in the Senate.
Well, I mean, the idea is to obviously keep the promises that President Trump made, but there's all these new complexities now to the tax policy plans because Trump has said he wants no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, and all the rest. That takes time to write a new tax bill. And I've already spoken with a couple of senators who say there's absolutely no way they are voting yes to eliminate or raise the debt ceiling. President Trump wants that in this major bill. I know you guys don't usually like big bills. Can this really, I mean, is this really realistic that you can get this done?
Well, let me talk about two quick things. Tax policy overall, most of it is actually going to be reauthorizing the Trump tax cuts, which, by the way, is the best tax policy our nation's ever had. We already know what it is. So putting that into this no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security, yes, you have to write that language. I actually wrote the language with Senator Ted Cruz for no tax on tips. We wrote it late in the last Congress. That's policy that we already have drafted. You'll have to ruminate it with colleagues, get that piece through. But to debt ceiling, we have to really have a decision with the fiscal hawks in both chambers. The debt ceiling is going to be raised. The question is it a deal cut with Chuck Schumer or it is a deal cut with Republicans on Capitol Hill?
That's right.
I would prefer we do that deal with Donald Trump as Republicans, have the necessary spending cuts associated with raising the debt ceiling, because we have to begin fiscal responsibility on our watch. The Democrats have lied to the American people, Maria, saying that you could just spend whatever and just raise taxes. You cannot raise taxes enough to cover this massive spending. What ends up happening is Americans lose some of the features of the federal government that they grew accustomed to needed and where cuts are needed. You can deliver that with debt ceiling increases.
Well, you've got this incoming team really focused on policy priorities and the outgoing team focused on political favors. You saw what Joe Biden just did over the weekend, giving America's highest civilian awards to George Soros, the Democrats' biggest donor, Hillary Clinton, Anna Wintour, Ralph Lauren, etc. Your thoughts on these Medal of Freedom awards?
I mean, it's just crazy, in my view. First of all, George Soros is on the absolute left of our politics. Everybody knows this. So for Joe Biden and his team, and I stress and his team, because let's be honest, Maria, do we really know what Joe Biden is thinking from day to day? We simply do not, and it's a tragedy for our country. And that's not to play politics. It's actually sad to see what's happened to him from a health perspective over these years. But this is his staff, and frankly, in part, his family, that are managing all this stuff from behind the scenes. So if the Democrats want to use their last moments to reward their leftists, makes no sense at all, but we're going to make America great. We're going to be focused on the American people.
All right, we're going to talk with Molly Hemingway about this as well coming up. Congressman,
I don't get it, man.
Byron Donalds.
I need to get faster internet or something because I can't seem to dual stream very well at all.
Us this morning. We'll be right back.
Oh, there it is. That's all there is for that one.
This Week with George Stephanopoulos starts right now.
Homegrown terror. 14 killed, dozens injured in a New Year's Day attack.
To all the people of New Orleans, I grieve with you. Our nation grieves with you.
Law enforcement officials search for how and why the killer radicalized.
Oh, I'm streaming on YouTube as well, Terry. I started streaming on YouTube as well, but I don't know. I don't think I have the upload speed or something. It's doing a little bit better now that I dropped my bit rate down. I dropped my YouTube or my Twitch bit rate down from like 5,000 down to like 3,400, and it seems to be doing better now. I can't remember if my max, if I get like, I thought I got like 20 meg upload or something. Maybe I'm at 10 or something. I don't know. We're actually supposed to be getting fiber. We're actually supposed to be getting fiber where I live, so I may get fiber instead of cable or something. Try to do better internet.
100% inspired by ISIS.
Oh, we already get hit. We got hit bad, Crazy Noodles. We got like 6 inches of snow here. 8 inches of snow, maybe.
With the Homeland Security Secretary on the investigation and the national threat environment. And Texas Republican Congressman Michael McCaul on ISIS efforts to exert influence at home and abroad. And Mike Johnson holds on as House Speaker.
It is the great honor of my life to serve this body with all of you.
Our Powerhouse Roundtable on the agenda ahead. Plus, Dr. Ashish Jha on growing concerns over the threat from bird flu.
Are you kidding me?
Let us create together.
They're still pushing bird flu? Oh my word.
Unity and trust.
The nation reflects on the life and legacy of America's longest living president as he's laid to rest.
From ABC News, it's This Week. Here now, George Stephanopoulos.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. In the wake of the New Year's Day terror attack in New Orleans, security officials across the country are on high alert for a series of high-profile events now feared to be targets. The Golden Globes in L.A. tonight.
No, Jake, there's separate chats. There's a YouTube chat, there's a Twitch chat.
Certification of the 2024 election at the Capitol tomorrow. Jimmy Carter's state funeral in Washington later this week, followed by Donald Trump's inauguration on January 20th, and the Super Bowl back in New Orleans on February 9th. Chief Justice correspondent Pierre Thomas starts us off with what security experts are calling the most dangerous threat environment since 9/11.
Within days of the eruption of violence in Israel stemming from Hamas's horrific October 7th, 2023 terror attack, FBI and Homeland Security officials worried that homegrown radicals could be energized. A concern that violence, even a world away, could beget violence here at home. And that radicals of many different ideologies would seek opportunities to use low-tech weapons that would be deadly efficient.
We're in a unique moment. And the current conflict is contributing to that.
Bird flu is fake news.
Bulletin from October 19, 2023 flatly states that in response to the Middle East conflict, radicals here in the U.S. likely would employ unsophisticated tactics among them firearms, knives, and vehicle ramming attacks due to easy weapon access. Intelligence analysts say by January, ISIS sought to capitalize on the violence in Israel. One of its leaders...
Yeah, I've seen that before as well, Jake. I'd like to know what it's called. How's my YouTube stream, Jake? Because people have been telling me my YouTube stream is like lagging and dropping frames and everything else. Is my YouTube stream lagging? Is it worse than my Twitch one? And how's my Twitch stream, guys? Is my Twitch stream okay, or am I not lagging at all or anything?
Issuing an audio recording calling on supporters and sympathizers to kill Christian and Jewish targets wherever you find them. Sources telling ABC News that ISIS call to action stoked an already volatile threat environment, perhaps the most dangerous since 9/11.
Yeah, I don't know why it's so choppy.
I would be hard-pressed to think of a time where so many threats to our public safety and national security were so elevated all at once.
And we would soon see hard evidence of a resurgent ISIS still with influence inside the U.S. On April 8th, the FBI arrested this 18-year-old Idaho man seen here with a knife and ISIS flag, accusing him of planning to commit mass murder at a series of local churches. In October, the FBI charged an Oklahoma City man and a juvenile with plotting an Election Day massacre in the name of ISIS.
We have been warning for quite some time now that we are in a heightened threat environment from malign foreign actors.
What I don't understand is why it's only my YouTube. Only YouTube drops frames. Everything else seems fine. Everything, my Twitch stream is fine. It's only the YouTube stream.
Including in particular ISIS.
In the early hours
I'm sure they are, Num.
All the fears
yes,
about
he is,
ISIS,
Eric. Yep.
and the use of low-tech weapons, including vehicles, unfolding in New Orleans. 14 victims brutally murdered, run over by this pickup truck driven by an alleged ISIS sympathizer who died in a hail of gunfire in a shootout with police. The FBI says he was armed to the teeth with an assault rifle, handgun, and pipe bombs that he hoped to detonate remotely. The anticipated nightmare fully realized.
The main focus of the investigation right now, trying to figure out if the suspect was radicalized on his own or if someone from ISIS directed him in any way. ISIS and other terror groups, including white supremacists, look for events or circumstances to capitalize on, like the Middle East conflict. They push out so much hate material on social media, and trying to figure out who is simply consuming the information and who might turn terrorists plotting to kill, that's the challenge, George.
And Pierre, you've been reporting more on what we saw from those Facebook posts of the killer.
Indeed, George. We were able to review yesterday some information, and the source walked us through what he posted. It's truly chilling. He's so calm, talking about possibly trying to kill his family, and that he was en route to New Orleans. And it was very clear that he was just cold-blooded.
Of course, Panzer. Of course, Panzer. Yep.
Many, many people, George.
Okay, Pierre, we just saw John Cohen there, our Homeland Security expert, as well. John, veteran of the Homeland Security Department. Thank you for joining us as well. And John, let me begin with you here. We are coming off a year, New Year's, after this New Year's Day attack, coming off a year that was just packed with threats.
Yeah, absolutely, George. You know, in the year leading up to the election, state and local law enforcement officials across the country were having to confront increased levels of cyber attack directed at government operations, efforts by foreign and domestic forces to disrupt government operations, including the election, through bomb threats and other types of disruptive events, threats to public officials, and acts of political violence. We had two assassination attempts directed at a presidential candidate and the incoming president of the United States, and the FBI and Secret Service disrupted a number of other attacks. Those acts of violence did not end with the election. Just since the election, we had a targeted homicide of the CEO of United Health in New York City. We had a school shooting in Wisconsin, and we had the events of New Year's Day, not to mention a cyber attack directed at the Treasury Department. So the threat hasn't ended. It remains in place.
And you've been focused on this threat for your entire career in the Homeland Security Department and beyond. How has the threat evolved over the last decade?
Well, Pierre hit on this. It's much more threat actors, whether they be foreign intelligence services, terrorist groups, Criminal organizations have embraced the power of the internet. Much of the violence that I was just describing is fueled by an online ecosystem that's saturated with conspiracy theories and other content that's specifically placed there to inspire acts of violence and to instruct people on how to carry out these types of attacks. And I think, unfortunately, our law enforcement and counterterrorism community has not adapted to the change in threat environment that we're experiencing every day across the nation.
What would that adaptation look like?
Well, first, it's becoming much more aware and studying and analyzing the content that's being placed there by these foreign and domestic threat actors, thinking through how that content could influence physical world activities. The individual who conducted the vehicle ramming attack in New Orleans, very clearly he was consuming Islamic State content not only intended to inspire him, but to instruct him on how to conduct a vehicle ramming attack. So if law enforcement can do a better job studying that online activity, in addition to recognizing the warnings.
So they literally want law enforcement like monitoring people for what kind of online content they're consuming? That's mass surveillance. That's dystopia. That's Orwell 1984. Wow, these people are evil.
Signs that may exist in our communities, they can do a better job in detecting and mitigating potential threats.
Pierre, I laid out that series of big public events coming up over the next month. How are officials preparing for it?
Well, they're rethinking how they can upgrade the security. Obviously, much more attention being paid to the potential of vehicle ramming attacks. And George, I would also say that it's clearly a moment, a witch's brew moment, as I call it, where law enforcement now knows that on every level, in so many different categories, they must be prepared. And the notion that there will be some people that, are not, that do not come up on the radar screen. My sources telling me last night, so far there's no indication that any information about this suspect was brought to the attention of law enforcement. That's just a real issue. So you have to go into some of these major events thinking about the possibility of
that's surprising because most of the time they're on the radar.
Someone showing up and acting out.
This week, we also saw that explosion and suicide outside the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas. No connection between New Orleans and Las Vegas except...
Oh, yeah, no connection. Really? No connection?
John Cohen. Both perpetrators, veterans of the military, we're seeing increasing radicalization among former military members. How serious a threat?
Very serious. Members of our armed forces are not immune to the same underlying factors that are fueling the threat, impacting the nation. We have a number of people, particularly those...
This is so sick now, how they're trying to say now our military veterans are terrorist threats. These people are sick.
Served in conflict zones multiple times, who feel disconnected from community, disaffected. They're angry. They feel they're being treated unfairly. They're spending significant periods of time online consuming content that's placed there that's intended to exploit the divisive issues or those very issues that may be causing that anger. And increasingly, we are seeing people come to believe that violence is the only acceptable way to express their views, and they're going out and conducting attacks. During the beginning of the Biden administration, there was an effort to better understand the impact of radicalization on our armed forces, as well as within our law enforcement community, but quite frankly, those efforts didn't really go very far.
John Cohen, Pierre Thomas, thanks very much. Let's talk more about this now with the Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Secretary Mayorkas, thank you for joining us.
This rat, this dirtball rat.
This is a witch's brew moment. Do you agree?
It's something that we've been discussing publicly for quite some time, George. We have a heightened threat environment, as Director Wray and the Attorney General both articulated, and we've been saying this for quite a number of months. We have not only the persistent...
Yeah, we have a higher threat environment because you let tens of millions of illegal aliens in here, you scumbag.
...of foreign terrorism that, of course, created the Department of Homeland Security. But we have adverse nation states. And for the past 10 years, we've seen a significant increase in what we term homegrown violent extremism. It is a very difficult threat landscape, and it is why that we as a community, not just the federal government, but state and local officials and residents need to be alert to it and take the precautions necessary to avoid violence from occurring.
So what precautions are being taken ahead of this series of events that I've outlined and discussed with Pierre?
I think the successful conclusion of the Sugar Bowl is a powerful example of a response to a tragedy and precautionary measures taken in its wake. We deployed additional personnel. We worked very closely with public officials and law enforcement in New Orleans to make sure the Sugar Bowl proceeded accordingly. We took additional sweeping measures.
You know it, Num. You know it.
And screening measures. So we took a host of actions to supplement that which already was in place. And we are proceeding accordingly with respect to tomorrow, the certification of the election, the state funeral of former President Jimmy Carter, the inauguration of President-elect Trump, and continuing thereon.
Are you seeing any specific threats, or is it just an overall concern?
It is an overall concern, and when we identify a specific threat, we in law enforcement respond very quickly to it. In that regard, as we continue to grieve for the victims of the terrorist attack in New Orleans, we also have to take stock of a brief moment of footage that we saw when law enforcement on the scene were notified of the attack, how they ran towards
death blow. Death blow.
Powerful example of what our frontline personnel in law enforcement and the first responder community do each and every day across this country.
Well, one of the things we saw in the wake of the New Orleans attack, former President Trump immediately went on Truth Social and talked about open border policy leading in some ways, suggested it led in some ways to this event, echoed by something that the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, also said on Thursday of this week. I want to play that.
The Biden administration has been completely derelict in its duty. The congressional Republicans, we here in the House and the Senate, have repeatedly asked the DHS under the Biden administration about the correlation, the obvious concern about terrorism and the wide open border. The idea that dangerous people were coming here in droves and setting up potentially terrorist cells around the country. We have been ringing the alarms.
Of course, the perpetrator is an American citizen raised in Texas, but how do you respond to that overall argument?
George, let me repeat what you said. The assailant who perpetrated the terrorist attack in New Orleans was born in the United States, raised in the United States, and served.
I'm so sick of them saying this. It's like, okay, so let's say an illegal alien comes here, has a kid, raises them not as an American, but as a terrorist, for example, and then they're like, oh, this is an American. This is a full-blown American citizen. Not really. Give me a break.
In our armed forces. It is not an issue of the border. With respect to the border, our highest responsibility, and one that we work to fulfill each and every day throughout the Department of Homeland Security, throughout the federal government, is the safety and security of the American people. That is what we have incredibly talented and dedicated individuals doing every day in their careers.
You mentioned the possibility of foreign actors as well. What impact has the fall of the Assad regime in Syria had on the threat environment here at home?
We're very concerned about the instability that has resulted from that, and whether, in fact, it creates some space for the reemergence of ISIS in Syria. And ISIS continues to seek to radicalize individuals outside of the Middle East and throughout the world, and that is something that we are, of course, also very focused on. And John Cohen, the expert you had earlier, with whom I have worked very closely for many years, correctly spoke of.
Let me also ask you about this issue of extremism inside the military, radicalization of service members and former service members.
Alejandro Mayorkas, it's just so obvious that he's a liar and kind of an evil guy. You can just tell. Like, if you have any sense of, like, character or human judgment, you can tell this is an evil liar, period.
The former President Trump's nominee for Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, has called this issue of extremism in the military a sham, suggested that perhaps some of the efforts to combat extremism are going to end. What's your response?
I would say this, George, the phenomenon of radicalization of individuals is not limited to the military. It is something that we are very focused upon in society writ large. The military is not immune to it, nor is the federal workforce, but this is something that we have to address as a community, not politicize, but rather be united in confronting and combating.
There's always a concern that bad actors are going to try to exploit times of transition in order to attack. What kind of coordination have you had with Governor Kristi Noem, who's been nominated to be your successor as Homeland Security Secretary, particularly as we focus on the inauguration?
I have spoken with Governor Noem a number of times, including on New Year's Day and immediately thereafter with respect to the horrific terrorist attack. And we have spoken substantively about the measures that we take, and I am incredibly devoted to a smooth and successful transition to the success of Governor Noem, should she be confirmed as the Secretary of Homeland Security. And I
shut up. This guy's just full of it, isn't he? Holy cow.
Much appreciated her focus on the substantive issues that we were discussing.
A lot, PM. 1927, what up?
Republican response now from Congressman Mike McCaul, the former chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, also the former chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman McCaul, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This morning. What are the big questions you have about the threat environment right now?
Well, I think it's a rising threat. When I chaired the Homeland Security Committee, we had a lot of external operations, like, explosives on airplanes. Then it morphed into radicalization on the internet. I think you asked that question earlier about the evolution of the threat. And so particularly I would say the New Orleans case was radicalization online. But what we're worried about in that case is his travels to Egypt and what was going on there. He was involved with a rare bomb-making material that was not available in the United States. So I know that they're saying this is, kind of a lone wolf type situation, but there are seem to be some real ISIS connections here that need to be followed up. And I know the FBI and Homeland are working very diligently, scrubbing through the hard drives, laptops, and cell phones to find out what happened, but also what was he doing in Egypt for a month. He comes back. It reminds me so much, George, of the Boston bomber who traveled to Dagestan.
Yeah, no, it's got nothing to do with it, Num, other than the mainstream media likes to attack vets in the military.
Came back and then built this pressure cooker bomb that led to the deaths of so many people in that marathon.
What's your advice to the incoming Trump administration on what their top priorities should be right now to address this threat?
It's real. I think there's an uptick in it. I think the Christmas market vehicle attack, it's an easy way. It's like a killer machine, a vehicle that can be easily used. And I think they got to be very focused on this. The other thing, George, I'm very worried about is with the fall of Afghanistan and the debacle and with what happened there, we are seeing a resurgence of ISIS and ISIS-K in the Khorasan region between Afghanistan and Pakistan that concerns me greatly. We have seen, we know that 8 ISIS individuals have entered the United States through that. So you really have 2 types of threats. One is operational. The other one is inspired attacks radicalized over the internet. They're both equally lethal, and they need to be focused on to stop it. There are usually warning signs, though. In these cases, I don't really see a whole lot of warning signs, at least so far, other than right before the attacks. We have to pay attention to the social media and connect the dots before these events happen.
Before you go, I also want to ask
How? I don't want the government doing mass surveillance. I'm sick of these people saying we need mass surveillance to stop this kind of stuff.
About Ukraine, you've been a strong supporter of aid to Ukraine as chair of House Foreign Affairs Committee. Do you believe that former President Trump shares your sense of urgency there?
Well, I do believe Keith Kellogg, the special envoy, talked to him many times, believes that we cannot afford to lose Ukraine to Russia. That would be a horrible foreign policy decision that would put us in the position of losing to Russia. in Ukraine and threatening Eastern Europe. And the fact is, George, I can't overemphasize, as I have to my colleagues, it's not just Putin. Putin is aligned with Chairman Xi in China, who threatens the Indo-Pacific. He's also aligned with the Ayatollah in the Middle East, who we have seen threaten Israel.
Wow, I love your
and they're all in this together. And Kim Jong-un has sent 10,000 troops of his own to fight Ukraine. I just think that they're all in this together. We got to take it seriously. If we can negotiate a peaceful settlement, great. But I think the Ukrainians need more leverage that the current administration has not given them. And when they have that leverage going to the table, they'll have more, I think, power.
But I guess I'm going to go back to the question. Do you think that President Trump has used that leverage effectively in the past? Is he prepared to use it in the future?
Obviously, yes, George Stephanopoulos.
Do you think that former President Trump has used that leverage that you discussed in the past? Is he prepared to use it in the future?
I don't think the Biden administration has given them the leverage. I think President Trump does want to end the war, have a peaceful negotiation. We're all for that. But it's got to be on terms that do not throw Ukraine under the bus. They were thrown under the bus in the Budapest agreements, where they gave up all their nuclear weapons in assurance for security. And guess what happened? There was none. And if there is a deal cut, we have to have teeth in that enforcement agreement, such that if Russia ever invades again, there will be consequences, because they gave up all their nuclear weapons, Ukraine did, and there was no response after the Budapest agreement on that. I think NATO is stronger now, and I hope the president recognizes that. They're an important ally. And just as I went to Battle of the Bulge and honor those troops, 1939, history does repeat itself, and we're seeing a threat in the Indo-Pacific and in Europe, very similar to what we saw in 1939.
Congressman McCall, thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks, George.
Wow.
Coming up, remembering the life and legacy of former President Jimmy Carter. We're back in a moment.
Oh my gosh, are they going to do a Jimmy Carter thing? Are you serious?
There you see the Carter Center in Atlanta this morning, where former President Jimmy Carter is lying in repose. He passed away 1 week ago today at the age of 100, the longest living president in American history. Yesterday kicked off a week of services honoring the 39th president. Our senior national correspondent Steve Osunsami reports from Georgia.
Yeah, that made no sense, did it, Panzer?
Day, but the sun shined brightly on Jimmy Carter. As many would tell you here, it was a perfect moment to call him home to the heavens. This will be a national goodbye for the former president that will last for days. And it started with members of his family outside the rural hospital that quietly cared for the president and former First Lady for years. The Secret Service agents who protected them carried his casket. People came from small towns in Georgia and from around the world to line the roads and say goodbye. The first stop was at his childhood home in front of a large bell at his family's old farm that would wake them up in the morning. They rang that bell 39 times to honor this 39th president. After a 4-hour drive through backcountry roads, the former president's remains arrived at the Georgia state capitol, stopping for a moment of silence in a place where he once served as a state senator and governor. Before he died, the former president insisted that the first event of his funeral take place at the Carter Center in Atlanta, in front of the staff, scientists, and peacemakers who he worked with over the years to help improve lives around the world.
Celebrating this incredible life, and a life that I think we can all agree is as full and powerful as any life can be. As someone said, it's amazing what you can cram into 100 years.
Carter's one-term presidency wasn't as beloved as his time afterwards. His genuine accomplishments on the world stage were overshadowed by high inflation at home and by a hostage crisis in Iran. But it helped set the stage for his time after the White House, where he redefined what it means to serve one's country, from building homes for the poor with Habitat for Humanity to ending diseases with his team of experts at the Carter Center. It would win him the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002. But he would never forget where he came from. always coming home to Plains, Georgia, where he and the love of his life, former First Lady Rosalynn Carter, lived out their years.
He was an amazing man, and he was held up and propped up and soothed by an amazing woman. And the two of them together changed the world. And it was an amazing thing to watch from so close.
After a state funeral in the nation's capital on Thursday, he will be buried next to her in a private ceremony. It was a spot they picked out before she died, next to a willow tree, together again.
Here at the Carter Center, people have come through the night to pay their respects at the visitation.
It's flipping freezing in here.
Outside, they're leaving flowers and jars of peanuts at the sign directly behind me.
Dude, how cool does that look?
In addition to everything else, one of the world's most famous former peanut farmers. There's a phrase I'm hearing over and over again, George, and that is that they just don't make them like this anymore. And that's because this is a former leader of the free world who never forgot where he came from, who always loved his wife and didn't care so much about fancy cars or fancy homes. To many people, he is just simply an honest
I do look like a hunter, don't I?
Steve, you've covered the former president for such a long time. What strikes you most on a personal level?
On a personal level, I'm struck by his stubborn frugality. He was very stubborn about that. I remember interviewing him once at the Carter Center here, and it was extremely hot. And I tried to get them to turn on the air conditioning, and they were telling me that he would never, ever let any of us step on his power bill. At his home, I heard stories from his family about old appliances that they wanted to switch out and change and improve, and he wouldn't let them because the old ones worked. He was from a generation that valued hard work and honesty. And I'm also struck by the love that he had for his wife. It was very important to him, his wife, and her support. They were a true team. And as he said, it was the love he had for her that powered him through this world and was going to get him into the next. George.
Yeah, and marrying her, he said, it was the best decision he ever made. What more can we expect this week as the former president makes his way to Washington?
The visitation here in Atlanta continues until Tuesday morning. Then his remains will be moved to Washington, where there will also be another public visitation. Then the state funeral is scheduled on Thursday, where President Biden will deliver a eulogy. After that, President Carter will head home here to Georgia for a private ceremony at his home, where he will be buried alongside his wife. And George, it will be a spot that he and his wife picked out together before she died. George.
And I know you'll be part of our full coverage. That all starts on Tuesday. Steve Osunsami, thanks. We'll be right back with the Roundtable.
The American people have called on us to reject business as usual and throw out the status quo. We must and we will heed their call. Working together, we have the potential to be one of the most consequential Congresses in the history of this great nation. So long as we work together, we do the right thing, and we put America first.
House Speaker Mike Johnson reelected on Friday after a couple of ballots. One of the things we're going to talk about on our roundtable with former DNC Chair Donna Brazile, the executive editor of the Associated Press, Julie Pace, New York Times national political reporter Asad Hernan, and the Manhattan Institute President Reihan Salam. Thank you all for being here this morning. Julie, let me begin with you. Such a narrow margin in the House, not 15 ballots for Mike Johnson like Kevin McCarthy, just a couple. But what did we learn from this election?
Well, look, I think we learned that Johnson has the backing of President Trump for now, incoming President Trump, and that's crucial for him and really any Republican leader right now. You can't survive without having Trump's backing. He's going to owe Trump some things coming out of this election to the speakership. He's going to owe him moving forward Trump's agenda in the way Trump wants it done. And that's going to be the challenge, because within that very narrow Republican majority, there are big differences in how to enact that agenda, particularly around how you offset the extension of the Trump tax cuts, how you make sure that you're not adding
right, 1927,
to government spending here. You're going to see moderate Republicans who are going to be resistant to some of the really steep spending cuts that would be required to pull that off. And that's even before you get into raising the debt ceiling, any of the immigration policies that Trump wants to enact. So a win for Johnson for now, but a lot of challenges to come.
Ryan, what, if anything, did President Trump give up in order to get those few votes that he needed for Mike Johnson?
Well, I don't think he gave up very much. I think fundamentally the president-elect has an enormous amount of authority, and much of the opposition you've seen from the House Freedom Caucus has been more procedural and personality-based than really ideological. What we're seeing is, for now, the enormous leverage that the president-elect has within his party.
I mean, I think that the biggest reason Speaker Johnson...
Oh, they don't like to hear that Trump has all the power.
It's proven to be a kind of dead man walking in the Republican House, right? Going back to Paul Ryan, going back to Kevin McCarthy, as you said. But I think to Julie's point, the differences within the Republican caucus are large. And so when it gets to enacting an agenda, those differences are going to come out. They've been papered over the last couple of years if they've been an opposition party. But specifically when it comes to spending and when it comes to enacting those immigration enforcement, we're going to see that Johnson's task become more difficult. And we've seen Donald Trump obviously have such transactional relationships with people. Speaker Johnson's working for him right now. The question is, will he be working for him in 6 months?
Hard to imagine any Democrats voting for any part of that agenda, at least right now.
Why? I mean, there's no reason. I mean, I thought Leader Jeffries laid it out really well when he said, here are the areas where we can agree. We can agree that we can fix the borders, but we need comprehensive immigration reform. We can agree that we can raise the debt ceiling.
Wow. So we'll fix the border, but only if you give all of the illegal criminal aliens free American citizenship. What a scumball lady this is. Wow.
We're going to protect entitlements, Social Security, Medicare. Look, as an old House staffer, it's always interesting, George, to watch, you know, the first day, the swearing-in ceremony, to see the Democratic caucus, the most diverse caucus in American history. But to look at my Republican friends and to see the struggle that they're going through, watching Steve Scalise counting the votes. This is going to happen on every vote in the House from now until they secure more members. I believe that Speaker Johnson will have to call on
Cleaner. Happy New Year. Same to you.
Pass crucial bills like the March 20th reconciliation, like the debt ceiling, and perhaps much more.
Well, that's going to be the big question, Julie Pace. 53 Republicans in the Senate, not 60. So the question is for President Trump, can he get all of his agenda into this reconciliation package, which only requires a majority, or will he need Democrats?
Well, and that's what he wants. He wants to get everything together at once. And some of this is because, you know, any president, even a president like Trump, who has such consolidated power within his party, you have a pretty narrow window to get big ticket items through because you start getting into those midterm cycles. And again, your more moderate swing district members are going to be very cautious on what they're voting for here. So how they do this procedurally, you know, procedure doesn't tend to be the most exciting thing to talk about, but actually the procedural process is going to be really crucial for them.
In this case, Ryan, that's true. I mean, reconciliation is a term that most Americans don't understand in terms of the budgets, but it's crucially important because then you only need a majority. You don't need the 60 votes. He's got to cram his entire agenda into that package.
Well, he doesn't need to, and that's why Senate Majority Leader Thune has been saying, guys, let's focus on a more encompassing, broad-based, potentially bipartisan package on defense, on the border. Now, right now, President-elect Trump is resistant to that, but that's the kind of package that could build momentum, political momentum, legislative momentum, that would then help grease the wheels for the more difficult fiscal policy questions coming down the line when it comes to extending the tax cuts.
But one macro point I think can't be lost here is that the difference between Trump the first time and this time is that Republicans have been talking for the last 4 years about how they felt thwarted in the first Trump administration by congressional Republicans. And so there is a base of Republicans that will be pressuring their members of Congress to enact Trump's agenda in full, and I think a different way. And so I know that there's procedural questions are key, obviously, this year, but I think we're going to see
for sure. That guy's right about that.
Go through that type of steps and more willing to be creative about how to make this agenda happen in a way that it can even blow up bureaucracy and all those other things. I think we should think of them going around Congress as much as we think of how they're going to get through Congress.
You can't go around Congress on the debt limit.
So for sure. I'm talking about things like immigration, though.
Right, but on the debt limit, you've got so many Republicans who said they're never going to vote for an increase in debt limit. President Trump, of course, needs to extend it.
Yeah, I mean, look, he tried to get it eliminated so that he could, you know, get his way coming when the extension is over with. The fact is Mr. Thune has said that he's going to preserve the filibuster. That's a math problem in the United States Senate. It's a math problem also in the House, George, because Speaker Johnson is about to lose 2 House members who are nominated for important positions in the Trump cabinet. So this math problem is not going to work in the Republican favor unless they understand that they need to come to Democrats. There are Democrats who supported some of Trump's agenda in the first term. I am sure that the president, once he decides, President-elect, once he decides to open the door, he might get a few, but he's not going to get a few by bullying Democrats and threatening to primary Democratic members.
And Donna's earlier point is a good one. What is the incentive for Democrats to help push any part of the Trump agenda forward? If they can get something out of it, then you could see, on certain pieces of this potentially. But right now, Democrats have very little incentive electorally or from a policy standpoint in doing that.
One of the first orders of business that former President Trump has promised, of course, is pardoning the January 6 rioters. Tomorrow, the anniversary of the January 6 riots, the new certification. We talked about the security threat, Acid Hunter, but in your
so now it's a riot, and it's no longer an insurrection.
Remarkable transformation of the view of January 6 created by President Trump.
Absolutely, and this has been a Republican effort that started in the week.
The incentive is you help Americans. Exactly, Num.
January 17th, just 11 days after.
Like the Democrats need something else for themselves personally to pass bills that are good for America. But unless the Democrats get something out of it, they won't vote for bills that are good for America. How messed up is that?
Republicans were warping the language around the January 6th and tying a different narrative. I was outside the federal prison where January 6th prisoners were the day that Trump was indicted himself, and they knew at that time that him getting elected
what's up,
meant they had an opportunity to be pardoned. This has been the thing that Trump talks about as his rallies, and for the most fervent part of his base, they are fully engulfed in a warped language that has completely misrepresented the type of actions we saw on that day. They have turned it from something that was a shameful act that was kind of universally condemned on that day to being something to actually rally around. And it speaks to, I think, the misinformation ecosystem that's taken root among a bunch of people.
Is there any risk for
Give me a break.
President Trump in those pardons?
Well, one of the big issues here is, yes, what happened for Trump's base and how he turned January 6th into a rallying cry, as Stead pointed out, but also what happened outside of his base. And one of the things there is that there's a perception, fair or otherwise, that Democrats have equivocated about political violence from anti-Israel protesters. More recently, the killing of United Health CEO Brian Thompson. There's a sense that there's some hypocrisy here that really dulled the outrage that a large majority of Americans felt about January 6th. And that's really important context here. So there's risk for Trump, absolutely. But I think that dulling of the outrage is a much bigger part of the political
but violence of any kind has no place in our society, and we have to condemn it. And look, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you have to be an American. That means I'll never forget that day, not only because I was on Fox News. I mean, I just said the quiet part out loud, and I'm sitting there thinking to myself, how the hell are they marching down the street? You need a permit. The Capitol is closed. This is an official day of business. And I'm being as rational as possible. And then I recognized with all of the lies and disinformation that people actually thought that they could stop the peaceful transfer of power. Seeing the news, seeing the policemen, the police officers, people that I had worked with, had seen all my young adult life on Capitol Hill. And those police families are still hurt. D.C. still feels wounded.
So they're still on and on and on and on and on about January 6th. It's literally 4 years later, and they're still talking about January 6th as the most important issue. Unreal.
By what happened on January 6th. So I really do believe that tomorrow you're going to see a different picture. You're going to see a vice president, much like Mike Pence, stand before the nation for the peaceful transfer of power. We have to return back to those norms that made this country what it is today.
We're also going to see Julie Pace at the end of this week, a remarkable moment, the sentencing of a former president for a felony.
It is incredible to think about, where we were a year, 18 months ago, in terms of the legal threats against President Trump. We will see a final sort of piece of that this week with the sentencing. Almost certainly the judge has already signaled this. No jail time, given that he's about to serve as president of the United States. But those legal threats against him actually ended up being a political force for good for his prospects. He really was able to use the prosecutions to argue that he was being targeted, that these were politically motivated, and we saw that a large portion of the American public believes that. He goes into office now really being able to, I think, put that part of his life behind him.
And Julie, just to build on that, you have in New York City right now where there are being people who are being set on fire in the subway system, there's a real sense the city is going out of control, and that local prosecutors haven't done their part on that front, but that many of them sought what many Americans see as political vendettas. That's something that has been very enervating and demotivating and demoralizing for a lot of Democrats right now, and we'll see where it goes from here.
There's so many what ifs, right? What if it was the January 6th case that went first? Would those legal problems have had a bigger type of political effect? But when we think back to early 2023, the reason Democrats thought that President Biden was okay, right? The reason, the get out of jail free card they had for themselves was they thought that Trump's legal problems were going to mean he was inherently invalid as a presidential candidate. That this week closes the chapter on that book. Not only was that not true, it actually propelled
That's
him.
hilarious. So he literally just admitted that the Democrats' entire strategy was to make Trump like totally invalid. Wow. They thought that Trump would be like considered like a convicted felon terrorist type of a guy. And it's like, no, he's like the best president we've ever had. We still support him. We love him. America loves him. Amazing. Amazing. What planet these people are on.
Today, thank you all very much. We'll be right back. The Biden administration is taking new steps to fight bird flu, directing hundreds of millions of dollars towards battling the virus that has spread widely in livestock and infected dozens of farm workers. But has the government done enough to prevent a new pandemic? What more must be done to stop the spread? I'm going to take those.
To stop the spread? Did he really just say that? George, we don't care about stopping the spread. What, have you not learned anything?
Questions to public health expert Dr. Ashish Jha after this report from Maria Villarreal.
This week, the Biden administration broadening its efforts to ward off
feedback on your little BS.
a potential bird flu outbreak in people. The Department of Health and Human Services allocating an additional $306 million. That money meant to help state and local preparedness programs enhance monitoring of the virus and fund additional research. The move comes amid concerns that the virus could potentially mutate and begin spreading between people. Health officials saying they have no evidence of that so far, but some experts cautioning that would be a potential catalyst for another pandemic. But the CDC says the current public health risk is low and that the greatest risk is to animals. The agency has confirmed approximately 60.
No. I'm not going to give you feedback on your little BS. No, Alter, what was I actually talking about when I said that?
6 cases in humans in the last year, with most causing mild illnesses.
You know what it was? I was actually reading like an email somebody sent, like a company sent me or something.
Some health experts caution that number may be an undercount.
They're monitoring more than 10,000 exposures, but they've only tested 530. What does that mean? That means we're not testing enough. And we know from other viruses that a lot of the
not testing enough.
In December, an unidentified 65-year-old
I don't want any testing
with underlying medical problems became the first severe case in the U.S.
There are spillover risks, and that's what we're seeing right now, which is when a virus comes from an animal population into the human population.
The patient had been in contact with sick and dead birds in a backyard flock. The CDC analyzing the virus within the patient, finding a concerning new mutation that hints at a better ability to infect people. But officials say the risk to the general public remains unchanged. So far, there has been no evidence that the virus is spreading from person to person. But the bird flu virus is widespread among livestock. All 50 states have outbreaks in poultry, and 16 states have outbreaks in cattle. For this week, Mireya Villarreal, ABC News.
And I'm joined now by Dr. Ashish Jha, the Dean of the Brown University School of Public Health. Also,
what an absolute joke. I cannot believe they're actually pushing that. Do they actually think that people are going to get into that?
You have Thank you for making time for us.
Great to be with you.
On a big day for you.
Thanks, Margaret. Right.
So let's start big picture. Republicans have unified control here in Washington, but the House Republicans have a pretty fractured caucus, a pretty narrow majority. How do you see that complicating the work you're able to get done over here in the Senate?
Well, we need, obviously, as you said, to get anything done, we have to work as a team. We have unified control. We have the majorities in the House, the Senate, and the White House, but the majority in the House is incredibly narrow, which creates some unique management challenges. But they've worked around them, and we will work around them and work with the Trump administration, the president and his team, on an agenda that he campaigned on and that many of our colleagues here in the Senate and the House campaigned on. And so we're excited about the opportunity. Yes, these are unusual circumstances with respect to the margins, particularly in the House, but we expect to deliver on what the American people asked us to do.
Do you think that'll hamstring you in terms of big policy changes that you could legislate around?
I think it's always challenging, and especially in this current political environment. You know, people have strong views, and as you might expect and have seen, we don't always agree among Republicans within the family. But
particularly among Republicans.
But I think when it comes to the big issues, securing the border, rebuilding the military, strengthening the economy, generating energy dominance for this country, those are all things on which we agree. And so I think as we proceed forward, with respect to even narrow margins, I think we're going to have hopefully a very unified effort when it comes to those core issues. We'll disagree on the margins and the process and all that sort of thing, but when it comes to the things we need to get done for the American people that we think move the country in the right direction, those are all things I think we agree on.
How often do you speak to the president-elect?
Fairly regularly. We've stayed in pretty good communication and contact, both in advance of the election and then subsequent to it, and especially now as we start charting the path forward with the agenda. Obviously getting consultation from him, from his team. We're working closely with his team now as we start to take control of the Senate now and the House today, and hopefully in the next couple of weeks before he takes the oath of office, we'll have things set up for him, including the opportunity to confirm a lot of his nominees.
What role do you see J.D. Vance, Senator, soon-to-be Vice President-elect? Is he going to be the guy sort of translating between the politics of the possible on the Hill and what the Trump agenda is?
I think J.D. is already performing that role, and I think will continue to. I think obviously he has the president's ear. He's widely respected by his colleagues here in the Senate and in the House, I would add. And I think he will be somebody who can help the administration as they work through these issues, figure out what's realistic, what's achievable, what we can accomplish here in the Senate, because he's been here. He knows it's challenging in the Senate. It's a short amount of time. But he's an incredibly talented person, as you know, very smart and a quick study. And I think if there's anybody who has been able to acclimate and understand the sort of the unique aspects of how the Senate operates in a short amount of time, it's him. But he's the president of the Senate, and I would expect that he'll continue to be someone that acts as a sort of an intermediary with the White House and the Senate and the House in trying to implement the president's agenda.
You've had disagreements with Donald Trump in the past. As part of this advise and consent role, the role of the Senate, will you tell him when you think he's wrong?
I will, and I think my job is to do everything I can to help him achieve success, be a successful president, which in my view means it will be a successful country. The things that he talked about on the campaign trail, the things that the American people voted for, are all things that I think this president wants to get done, we want to get done, and I'd say that our incentives are aligned. We have the same set of objectives, we want to get to the same destination, but I think at times there will be differences in how we get there. And I think I have to spell out as clearly as I can to anybody who asks what the challenges are in the Senate. The Senate's a very different institution, clearly functions different than the House of Representatives, and understanding the unique aspects of how the Senate operates is something that I'm going to have to be able to share and convey to the president and help him understand, I think, what the contours are of what we can accomplish here in the Senate and what's realistic.
You have a 53-seat majority over here, which means you can only lose 3 votes if Democrats remain unified in their opposition to some of Mr. Trump's picks for his cabinet. Do you expect them all to make it through, and if so, how quickly?
I think what I've promised is a fair process for all of them, and we'll ensure that they get a confirmation hearing, an opportunity to make their case. answer the hard questions that inevitably are going to come, and perform the role that the Senate has in terms of advice and consent. But I also believe that the president deserves, I defer to the president, when it comes to his picks, and I would say this of any president, they deserve a lot of latitude. And I think that, his picks are going to come through a process where if they get reported out of the committee, come across the floor of the Senate, we'll make sure that they get the vote. And I think that I suspect a lot of them will get through. And we'll see about all of them. Remains to be seen, but I think that's why we have the process, and we will adhere to that process and give all of these nominees an opportunity to make their case.
You've said you have to see if Democrats play ball or not, but you don't need Democrats to get these through. So does that mean you already know some of your Republican senators won't vote to confirm Kash Patel at the FBI or Pete Hegseth at the Pentagon?
We don't have, at this point, I don't think, clarity on that. I think these are nominees who are new enough. They've been going around and conducting their meetings, which I think, frankly, have gone very well. But they still have to make their case in front of the committee. And, we don't know all the information about some of these nominees. I think we know a lot about them. But they deserve a fair process. And that's
guitar player. It's freezing cold here, and there's about 8 inches of snow on the ground.
Committed to and promised, and I expect to deliver on. And ultimately, whether or not they get through that process is going to be up to each individual senator and how they decide to vote. We have a 3-vote margin in the Senate, as you point out, but I do think that in most cases, at least, most of our Republican senators are inclined to give the president the people that he wants in these positions. Given the process that they go through and whether or not they can manage the
right American Patriot.
Yep. They get to the floor for vote.
Does that include FBI background checks? I know often the ranking members get them on armed services, for example, but some of your colleagues, they want to see Pete Hegseth's FBI background check before they vote.
Right, and I think that's going to be determined largely by the committee chairs. I think there will be an interest, obviously. Well, sure. I mean, I think that you want to have as much background as possible that is available to the committees as they make their decisions. But I have a lot of confidence in our committee chairs. One of the things that I've made a focus of, at least my leadership here, is to get the committees functioning again in a way, ensuring that the committee chairs and individual members of the committee have an opportunity to make sure their voices are heard in the process and that we take advantage of the talent that we have on those individual committees. So I have a high level of confidence in our chairs that they will ensure that as members of the committee and of the full Senate have an opportunity to consider these nominees.
Alter, that's hilarious. To be frank, 2 or 3 inches of snow is almost Democrat men know. True.
That they've got all of the information available to them that they should have.
One of your colleagues told me you are a count the votes guy. You're not a twist the arm guy. You think that's fair?
Well, I think that, sometimes it depends a little bit on what your role is. The job that I have held now for the last 6 years, the whip job, differs if you're in the minority or in the majority. If you're in the majority, you need to get the votes. You're in the minority, you want to know where your vote count is, and you're playing defense as opposed to playing offense. They're very different roles. But I believe I understand my members, have worked with them all for a really long time, and I think whether it's actually counting, I think we're very accurate when it comes to counting. I take great pride in that and the work the team has done the last 6 years. But also, it's important to get the votes, and I believe when necessary, we know how to do that, and I've had to do that in the role that I have now.
Joe Manchin, and now former senator, told us recently on Face the Nation that his dad told him, if you can say no with a tear in your eye, you're all good.
Okay.
Do you agree with him on that?
Well, I think that, what I've always said is, as a whip, every member's vote is their vote. You in the end can't force somebody to vote.
By the way, pro-law, Eric is getting very, very nervous and scared, pro-law, that you're making a comeback on him here. It is now 1.3 million to 830,000. It's getting very, very close. American Patriot number 3 at 300,000, 1927 with 240,000. Fighter Killer number 5 at 185,000. Numb at number 6, 183,000. Numb doesn't look like Numb Heist anymore, but he's still hanging in there at number 6.
A against what their wishes are, what their constituents want them to do. So their vote is their vote. What I've always asked is that they not surprise us, and that if they tell you something, that's their word, and you expect them to adhere to that. And that's kind of always the way that I proceeded. And I think there are times in which individual senators, for state reasons and the constituents that they represent, may come to a different conclusion. And that's their right, that's their prerogative. And that's why my style, as I described, is obviously is persuasion. It's trying to get them to a place where, if possible, they can support the team. But I understand there are circumstances in which they're going to have to reflect the views of the people that elected them. And that's what this job ultimately is about.
Recess appointments.
Right.
Bypassing the Senate entirely. Would you ask Mr. Trump not to do that?
Well, here's the thing, and you asked earlier about cooperation from the Democrats. I don't think the Democrats are going to give us any votes. I mean, I hope they do. I think they will on some nominees. I mean, I've got enough feedback, readouts, I think, from some of these meetings, and I think that some of the president's nominees will win Democrat votes. But by and large, their
Senator
leadership.
Rubio, for example.
Sure, yeah. I mean,
Tulsi Gabbard.
Well, but I
Pete
mean, and I think
Hegseth,
there may,
Kash Patel.
we'll see, there's a whole bunch of nominees, some of whom will have more Democrat support than others. But I think in the end, the Democrat leadership in most cases is probably not going to be largely supportive of some of the president's picks, with maybe a few exceptions. But what's more important to me is not how they ultimately vote. You're right, you pointed this out. We have a majority. If we get 51 votes, Republican votes, we can win most of these nominees. But it's how much they drag that process out. And I pointed out to people that if you go back to President Obama, he had his first 12 cabinet nominees in 15 days. It took President Trump 42 days and President Biden 50 days. So we're moving in the wrong direction when it comes to giving a president the opportunity to get their people in place as quickly as possible. And so what I've said is we're going to keep, the options at our disposal to make sure that we are moving in a way consistent with the way the Senate functions and works, that gets these folks an opportunity to be voted on in the Senate.
I want to ask you about what you need to get done.
So in other words,
as well.
in other words, if we don't have most of Trump's people confirmed in the first couple of weeks here, then yeah, we're going to allow recess appointments. That's what the answer to that needs to be.
In terms of providing the president with the funding to execute on some of his big goals.
Right.
You've said you're going to go out of the gate with a generational investment in border security and immigration enforcement. You're going to pass it on 51 party line votes. If you want to govern through regular order, why go through this in a party line direction?
Well, it's one of those issues that has become incredibly divisive for the country, and there aren't very many people left in the middle. Reconciliation enables us. It doesn't come along very often where you have unified control of the government. In a lot of cases, it doesn't last very long. It's a couple of years. The Democrats provided a template in the last couple of years for how to expand the scope of what's available to get done through the reconciliation process. It's the only process in the Senate that enables you to enact legislation with a 51 vote threshold as opposed to 60.
Right.
And so immigration,
but it's out of the
border,
gate saying we're not going to work with Democrats.
Well, I'm not saying what they came out of the gate. They had their first reconciliation bill done in 4 weeks, coming out of when they got the majority.
$2 trillion.
Well, and
with
they
the COVID
spent
bill, and you didn't like it.
$2 trillion,
You
and then
faulted them
another
for using
$1 trillion with the IRA.
Exactly.
It would be ideal if we could figure out a way to do things at the 60 vote threshold, and there are a number of things we will. I mean, there are a number of issues where we're going to have to get 60 votes. We have to get 60 votes on.
No, I don't, Altair. No, I support the current constitutional provision where the Senate has advice and consent.
Bills. We have to get 60 votes on a farm bill, which is expired. Those are going to be bipartisan initiatives. But there are some things that you can do, and the Democrats, again, created the template for doing this with how they did the IRA and the American Rescue Plan for doing some things at 51. And we think that a generational investment in the border is necessary given where we are after the last 4 years of what I think is a very failed Biden-Harris border policy, and I think there isn't anybody who objectively wouldn't agree with that. 10.5 million people coming across the border illegally, including a lot of very unsavory folks, members of terrorist organizations and criminal elements and cartels, et cetera.
Do you know they're members of terrorist organizations?
Sure.
Here on US soil? A terrorist
well, I'm
cell on
saying
US
they've been
soil?
apprehended.
Okay.
We know that there are almost 300 that have been apprehended that are on the terrorist watch list.
Right.
And I think if they're apprehended...
So she's literally trying to pretend like there's not a single terrorist that's in the United States? She's serious?
That many, I suspect a lot of them have gotten through.
There are 1.4 million people here with deportation orders of removal against them. I've seen numbers that put the cost of expelling them at between $80 to $100 billion annually. Can you get that kind of money in the first 100 days?
Well, I think that what we're trying to do is get an assessment from the people who are going to be in place. They're going to be implementing a lot of the president's policies when it comes to the border to determine what that resource allocation is going to need.
They don't know yet.
Well, I think that what we do know is we need physical barriers, we need technological barriers, we need more ICE agents, we need more Border Patrol agents, and yes, we're going to need ways of deporting people that are on that list that you mentioned. And so it's going to take some resources to do that, which is why I would argue that when the president takes office, and he's going to do a lot of things on the border by executive order, by executive action, that we're going to need to be able to provide the resources in order for him to do that. And that's why I've suggested that we take that border issue on right away and enable him to do the things that he needs to do.
Is it true you're going to put some defense spending in that as well?
Well, I think one of the things that we always argue about around here is the amount of money that we need to spend on defense. And clearly, that is an issue where if you look at every Biden administration budget, there wasn't a single one of them when it came to military spending that kept up even with inflation. So we have a military readiness in this country. You know, we have the Defense Commission Strategy Group that comes out with a report all the time and tells us we are dramatically underfunded relative to countries like China, and that we don't have the capacity.
Issues, right?
Well, and we don't have the capacity and the capability to do what needs to be done to protect the country. So my argument would be, and yes, those should be bipartisan, but it is very difficult, in my experience around here. There's a big difference in delta in the two parties and how they approach the issue of defense and military readiness. And I think we are dramatically underfunding our military today. I think the president believes that, President Trump, and I think a lot of our Republican colleagues in the House and the Senate share that view. So can we do this through reconciliation? We're obviously looking at our options.
I want to make sure I ask you about the other big promise you made in terms of delivering on tax reform and reconciliation. The estimates are it could add $4 trillion over the next decade. Is that really something you think is going to pass on a party line vote and without any revenue or spending cuts? You can't be comfortable.
There are, it's current policy. So these are tax laws that will expire at the end of this year if Congress doesn't take action to extend them. And it would represent a $4 trillion tax increase on the American people if we don't extend that policy. We're going to have a very robust conversation about tax reform. I was a big part of it back in 2017 when we did the initial Trump tax cuts. And this time around, there's a lot riding on it. There's a lot riding on it economically. I think regulatory policy, tax policy, energy policy are going to be really essential to the strength of the economy, how fast we can grow and expand and create better paying jobs in this country. So I'm a big believer in pro-growth tax policy. I believe you get a lot of that back through growth. In additional revenue, every 1%.
Not tariffs, as Mr. Trump has promised.
Well, that's a different subject, but I would say every 1% increase in GDP and economic growth, we're told, generates about $3 trillion in additional tax revenue. So you're going to get some back in terms of a growth dividend, and there will be spending cuts. There's no question about it. Our members in both the House and the Senate want to ensure that when we do tax reform through reconciliation, that it also include significant reductions in spending, particularly in certain areas. And I think that's something that as we work through this, we'll figure out a way to do this in a way that hopefully inspires 51 votes in the Senate and 218 in the House to get this across the finish line.
But going out of the gate with two big issues on party line votes, aren't you concerned that will blow up your chances at working with Democrats on some of those bigger immigration issues or bigger policies?
Well, I think we need to continue to work on those big policy issues, but I also think we have some immediate concerns, matters that need to be addressed, one of which is national security, given the increasingly dangerous world in which we live. And of course, I would argue that starts with the border. So border, national security, I think energy policy, energy dominance is a huge objective and goal. And I would hope that a reconciliation bill could also address that issue. If we do something on taxes, that traditionally has been in the past. The Democrats did it twice while they had the majority in the last
big issues on party line votes, aren't you concerned that will blow up your chances at working with Democrats on some of those bigger immigration issues or bigger policies?
Since when are we wanting to work with Democrats, or have Democrats said they're willing to in good faith?
Concerns, matters that need to be addressed, one of which is national security, given the increasingly dangerous world in which we live. And of course, I would argue that starts with the border. So border, national security, I think energy policy, energy dominance is a huge objective and goal. And I would hope that a reconciliation bill could also address that issue. If we do something on taxes, that traditionally has been in the past. The Democrats did it twice while they had the majority in the last session of the Congress. They did 2 big reconciliation bills, both of which did a lot of tax policy, spending policy, et cetera.
Trump did that in 2017 too.
And that's
taxes.
and both sides have done it. And that's the unique aspect of having unified control of the government. You can do things in the Senate at 51 votes. But I think those are all important, and they are things that as a country, if we don't get right, I fear what the results and the outcome will be. You can't have a $4 trillion increase in taxes on the American people at the end of this year if Congress doesn't act. I think that is a very compelling, powerful incentive for members of Congress to come together and work constructively in a unified way as a team to get some of these things done. And yes, it'd be ideal if you could do it with bipartisan.
And we're joined by Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi. It's so good to see you here in person.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Can't believe she's still in Congress. She looks terrible.
Capitol, you and other members of Congress will be there to certify the election win in 2024 of Donald Trump. There's an unprecedented level of security, in part because of what happened 4 years ago with the violent attack by his supporters to change the outcome of the last election. Why do you think that so many members of the American public decided that was not disqualifying when it came to re-electing him president?
Because the Democrats are worse. Easy.
Again, thank you for the opportunity to talk about this, because the denial that they had about the election, which was what they were acting upon, and the denial that they've had since then about what happened on January 6th is just appalling. They want to revise history, and they just can't. But I'm so glad that they have increased security.
Wait, what?
And
what's she talking about?
That this will be very peaceful, because the public knows that. Now, to your question, I think it isn't, I wouldn't say that the American people disregarded this. They just had a different view as to what was in their interest economically and the rest. So I don't call this a disregard of January 6th. I just call it something that they saw in their interest economically.
But I mean, even just last night at Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump was screening a documentary about the 2020 election, claiming his win and trying to talk about the legal challenges he had. There seems to be a continued effort to claim that he won in 2020.
It's really sad. It really is sad. And I don't know about the film that he had and the rest, but it's almost sick that he would be thinking that in 2020. He's won the election now. That will be clear. That will be clear. And tomorrow he will be clearly, we will be accepting the results of the Electoral College. So he should be triumphant about that.
He is, Pelosi. Don't worry, don't worry.
To fight a fight that he knows he lost is really sad.
You know, the president-elect has said that in the first 9 minutes of his new term, he will pardon many of those who participated in January 6th. He said he'll look at it a case-by-case basis. But in looking back at what happened 4 years ago, there are recordings, there's video evidence of what happened. It is personal for you. Some of these writers in your office chanting your name. One of the defendants, we were looking for Nancy to shoot her in the friggin' brain, but we didn't find her. for you, this is personal. So when you hear about pardons, do you think the nonviolent attackers deserve to be pardoned?
It's just amazing to me that here we are in the year of our Lord 2025, and both mainstream media outlets that we've seen so far today are focusing on January 6, 2021. It's the most bizarre. Like, did they learn nothing from the election that just happened?
The nonviolent, I think that's a violent attacker with the intention.
The violence itself.
Yeah.
The violent language, you think. The
violent language, yes, the intention. And, of course, the intention to attack the Vice President of the United States.
Oh, yeah, you care so much about Mike Pence.
That day, as
just
you know,
like you love Dick Cheney.
He called out to these people to continue their violence. My husband being a victim of all of that, and it's still...
That's a lie. No, he didn't. That's false. Trump never called for violence.
From that attack, so it just goes on and on. It isn't something that happens and then it's over. No, once you are attacked, you have consequences that continue. So I don't, it's really a strange person who's going to be president of the United States who thinks that it's okay to pardon people who are engaged in an attack. But let's do this. Let's just say, okay, to the American people, this is what this is about. Do not be conned by the denial of the election of 2020. And why would he be saying that? But he is. And then on top of that, the denial of what happened on January 6th.
But some of the 1,600 defendants here were really only charged with trespassing. And when you look at the profiles, the University of Chicago did a study. Half of those who broke into the Capitol were white-collar workers. They were small business owners. Didn't necessarily have a criminal record. When you look at that profile, you said intention. It was the intention itself, you think, that needs to be considered, more so than the crime, that it casts the crime itself of trespassing in a different light for you.
What is she talking about?
The president said he would go on a
What?
case-by-case basis.
Right.
So I assume that some of those people may not have engaged in the violent activities that some of the others did. Look at this beautiful Capitol, the dome built by Lincoln. Under Lincoln's leadership during the Civil War, they said, don't build the dome. It takes too much steel and manpower, they said, from the war effort. And he said, no, I have to show the resilience of America. Mm-hmm. And then under that dome, you saw flags, the flags that, just horrible flags under the dome of Lincoln. Mm-hmm. And so it was a tragedy, and we cannot be in denial about what it was. If the president's going to go on a case-by-case basis, I hope he does. And maybe
trespassers you would be comfortable with pardoning.
Well, it just depends on how they define what that is. But but I know that some of that encouragement and then the follow-up that so many people were threatened, including me, and to my home, looking for me and finding my husband, and as I say, who still suffers from head injuries on that day. So these things don't just happen and go away when you have a head injury.
Right.
But anyway, to see the threat to so many people in elective office, going beyond me, but so many people in elective office, it shouldn't be a threat to your family that you have chosen to do public service.
You wrote in your book about that 2022 attack on your husband. And you said your daughter told you she had known what you were signing up for. She would never have given you her blessing to run for office in the first place. Do you think that this threat of domestic violent extremism is having a chilling effect on new talent and anyone running for office?
Well, I certainly hope not. But over the years, when I was encouraging people to run for office, especially women, they would say, we could never take the abuse that you take. And that was really just abuse. It wasn't physical. It was criticism and the rest of that. And we don't want our children subjected to that. And yes, I do think it will have a negative impact on people running for public office. Just, in other words, if you're a mom and they go after you as a mom, and your child comes home crying from school because somebody said a negative thing because they saw it on TV, that the other side said something bad about you, you might not run for office.
So you think it will discourage particularly women?
Particularly women.
From running?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I know that it has, but I hope that it will not, that we will have shine a bright light on this and just say, this is unacceptable. This is unacceptable. See, for women, women are known to be more, shall we say, ethical than men. And so when they go after women candidates, they go after their ethics. And they'll say this, that, and the other thing. And then the child comes home from school crying because somebody said a bad thing about mom on TV. And nobody wants that. So hopefully the bright light shining on that will reduce that. But I think that women have proven that they are more ethical, and that they are, well, maybe they're not more ethical, they're all ethical, but that they can withstand that criticism.
Well, you, during the first Trump presidency as Speaker, you took very public stands to challenge Donald Trump when he was president. Democrats now are in the minority in this new Congress. Tom Suozzi from New York recently said it would be a mistake for Democrats to reflexively oppose Trump's ideas and brand themselves a national resistance movement. This is a Democrat who won in a Trump district, and he's warning fellow Democrats. Do you agree resistance is a bad strategy this time?
Well, let me just say, historically, when I became Speaker, it was when I ran with a Republican president, George Bush, and we opposed his policies. He wanted to privatize Social Security. And so we went against that, and we won. And then when I won again as Speaker, Donald Trump was president. We were saving Social Security in the beginning. Now we're saving the Affordable Care Act. So we won the majority, yes, by disagreeing on certain points. That doesn't mean you disagree on every issue, no. But it does mean that you protect the values that bring you to Congress, the vision that you have about health care, the values that you have about health care again, because health care is an issue that is so important because the health care costs are so high that it affects whether you can have housing, whether you can have food on the table and the rest. And so
you would encourage Democrats to work with Donald Trump on an issue like health care?
Well, I don't know that he wants to be on health care.
Are there opportunities to work with him on anything?
No, there have been other issues. No, on health care, no. But no, I don't say that we should work with him on health care. I'm saying we are out there to protect the Affordable Care Act. He said Obamacare sucks. Now, that's not something we want to work with, that Obamacare sucks. So we want to be out there to save the Affordable Care Act and recognize that reducing the cost of health care can enable people to show the relationship between ability to have housing and food when you have good, affordable care, health care.
Speaker Emerita, thank you for your time today.
Thank you. My pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you for making time for us.
Great to be with you.
On a big day for you.
Thanks, Margaret. Right.
So let's start big picture. Republicans have unified control here in Washington, but the House Republicans have a pretty fractured caucus, a pretty narrow majority. How do you see that complicating the work you're able to get done over here in the Senate?
Well, we need, obviously, as you said, to get anything done, we have to work as a team. We have unified control. We have the majorities in the House, the Senate, and the White House, but the majority in the House is incredibly narrow, which creates some unique management challenges. But they've worked around them, and we will work around them and work with the Trump administration, the president and his team, on an agenda that he campaigned on and that many of our colleagues here in the Senate and the House campaigned on. And so we're excited about the opportunity. Yes, these are unusual circumstances with respect to the margins, particularly in the House. But we expect to deliver on what the American people asked us to do.
Do you think that'll hamstring you in terms of big policy changes that you could legislate around?
I think it's always challenging, and especially in this current political environment. You know, people have strong views, and as you might expect and have seen, we don't always agree among Republicans within the family.
Particularly among Republicans.
But I think when it comes to the big issues, securing the border, rebuilding the military, strengthening the economy, generating energy dominance for this country, those are all things on which we agree. And so I think as we proceed forward, with respect to even narrow margins, I think we're going to have hopefully a very unified effort when it comes to those core issues. We'll disagree on the margins and the process and all that sort of thing, but when it comes to the things we need to get done for the American people that we think move the country in the right direction, those are all things I think we agree on.
How often do you speak to the president-elect?
Fairly regularly. We've stayed in pretty good communication and contact, both in advance of the election and then subsequent to it, and especially now as we start charting the path forward with the agenda. Obviously getting consultation from him, from his team. We're working closely with his team now as we.
Oh my gosh! Sorry, guys. I was gone that long. Oh no, that's only 2 minutes. Okay, sorry. My wife painted our house. Yo, Rodney Culver, what's up, Rodney? King Trump, amen, brother. Never thought the Democrats would work with Darth Vader, daughter. Yeah, no kidding, right? Dick Cheney, they love Dick Cheney. Rodney Culver, not sure if you're still there. Thanks for being here. Sorry about that. My wife painted the house, and so I went in there to get more ice for my iced tea here, and my wife was showing me all the new parts of the house she painted. So sorry for being gone that.
We go now to Tom Homan.
All right, we have this one, guys. We have this one. We have Tom Homan, the beast, the best ever, Tom Homan. And then from there, we are going to be doing the biggest of the best of the fakest of the fake. Meet the press.
Serve as Mr. Trump's border czar, and he joins us this morning from Naples, Florida. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
Deportations are now at a decade high. They were at the end of 2024, nearly 300,000 people deported by the Biden administration. The incoming administration has promised the largest deportation operation in history. What's the number?
Awesome.
What's the measure of success?
not even fratellosoli. What's up, frat? Not even Dick Cheney loves Dick Cheney.
Well, let's talk about this administration, what they claim is a huge deportation number this year. Actually, if you drill into the numbers, about 80% of those numbers are actually Border Patrol arrests that the enforcement remove operation of ICE process and move back across the border. They weren't interior enforcement arrests. If you look at the historic number of illegal entries the last 4 years, ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, has the lowest number of deportations in the history of the agency. So they're playing a numbers game, just like they play the numbers game and the number of people coming across the border. Okay. So even though they claim we got the highest number of deportations, look at those deportations, who actually made those arrests, who actually removed those people. It's not ICE.
Okay, it's still a higher number than the Trump administration, but I want to ask you, for the incoming Trump administration, what's the measure? It is not deportations at the border. You're saying you are going to measure success by people who are already internal in the country to deport. That's how you're going to measure it. And what's that figure?
Well, again, let's get the numbers straight. You say they were higher than Trump administration. It isn't about how many get deported, because Trump had illegal border crossings at a 45-year low. So, of course, removal is going to be lower. The number is how many were released in the United States that are now in the country.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, of course Donald Trump deported fewer people because he didn't have wide open borders where tons of people were coming across, and then you had to deport them.
Under Biden administration, we have millions of people released in the United States who have lost their hearings, and we got millions of people that are released in the United States despite a statute saying that you cannot be released in the United States without proper documentation. You shall be detained. So you can compare the numbers of deportations under Trump versus Biden, but when you consider a 45-year low in crossings, of course the number of deportations is going to be lower because we don't have that
of course there's going to be lower deportations because there's fewer people here because we sealed the border, you idiot.
In relation to process and deport.
Okay. Well, I'm just trying to measure success going forward. For day one, can you help us understand what the plan is? A number of industries in this country hire undocumented workers because they are cheap labor.
And we're supposed to feel bad for these people for hiring illegal aliens and committing felonies by doing so. We're supposed to feel bad for them because now they can't get their cheap labor. This is now the Democrat position? Wow.
On day one, are you going to restart raids on work sites, on construction sites?
Oh, please say yes. Please say yes.
The President Trump's been clear, as I've been clear from day one, that President is going to concentrate on public safety threats and national security threats. And have you heard from your previous segments, we have a huge national security issue in this country. The southwest border has become the biggest national security vulnerability we've seen in this nation. FBI Director Wray agrees with me. We know there's people in this country who pose a national security threat. They've arrested a record number of people on the terrorist watch list, a 3,500% increase in people on the terrorist watch list being arrested at the border. We got over 2 million known gotaways. We know 2 million people crossed the border, weren't arrested, weren't vetted, weren't fingerprinted. So you got to ask yourself, why did 2 million people pay more to get away? Why didn't they pay less, turn themselves into Border Patrol, get a free airline ticket to the city of their choice, get a free hotel room, get 3 meals a day, get free medical care?
I'm not disputing that it is a hemisphere-wide crisis. We're talking about how you're going to deal with it. That's why I'm asking you, when you say criminals, does that mean you are going to go into already existing prisons at local level and deport people who are in those prisons? Are you going to go to workforces? I mean, how do you know where the criminals are, I guess is the question. And if they're working at a work site, are you going to show up to surprise them?
Well, look, we know where a lot of the criminals are. ICE they're great at this work. We know where some are, but they simply haven't been able to go arrest them because of Secretary Mayorkas' priorities. It handcuffed ICE. So we know where a lot of criminals are. They've been prevented from arresting that we're going to arrest starting day one. As far as being in jails and prisons, we would love to work in local jails, but sanctuary cities won't allow us into those jails. It's much easier to arrest a public safety threat and the safety and security of public jail than out in the street, because the officer is safer that way, the alien is safer that way, the community is safer that way. But sanctuary cities who continue to release public safety threats back in the community, to the immigrant community, it puts that community at greater risk of crime. And here's what's going to happen when we go to the community and find that person, find that criminal alien, he's probably going to be with others will have to arrest. So it's not safe for the community, not safe for the officers, not safe for anybody. Let us arrest a bad guy in the jail cell where you chose to arrest somebody and put him in a jail cell because obviously he's a public safety threat.
Okay, what you just said in there, it sounded like you were talking about collateral arrests. So you're going to target people you know are criminals, but if they happen to be living in a house where there are other undocumented people, you're going to sweep them up too. That's what I think you were just saying there.
Of course you would,
I wonder how you're going to parse out some of those collateral arrests. For example, will Dreamers be protected. Donald Trump has said he wants to work with Democrats to protect them and give them status. That takes a long time in Congress. What do you do in the meantime? How do you make sure they're not caught up in a dragnet?
Look, every person ICE arrests, they do what we call a fugitive operations spreadsheet. They know exactly who they're going to arrest. They know exactly where they're probably likely to find them, and they have a lot of information on that arrest. Other people that are there that may be illegal, they'll handle by case basis.
Okay.
The concentration, I want to be clear on some public safety threats. More agents in the jails means less agents in the neighborhoods. That's why I'm pleading with sanctuary cities. Let us in the jail to arrest the bad guy. That way you're not forcing in the community. So, you know, if you go to an immigrant community and ask them, would you rather have ICE operating in your local jails or would you want them in the community? What do you think they're going to say? They don't want bad criminal aliens in their neighborhoods either. So let us work with the jails. Let us work with law enforcement. Sanctuary cities are not safe for the immigrant community. They're not safe for our officers.
Okay, so that's like Secure Communities Act kind of action. But then where do you send people?
Exactly, 1927.
Because some of these countries like Venezuela don't accept deportations right now. Mexico's president indicated her country might be willing to receive non-Mexican migrants who are deported. How does that work? Does the U.S. pay Mexico to then ship those people off somewhere else?
Well, first of all, we got President Trump coming in the Oval Office, and he's proven during his first administration his leadership on illegal immigration was a game changer because, for instance, El Salvador wouldn't take back MS-13 members when I was the ICE director. It took President Trump 48 hours to get El Salvador to take back their criminal aliens into their prisons. And Mexico didn't want to do the Remain in Mexico program, but President Trump was able to get Remain in Mexico established in Mexico. He was able to get Mexico put military in the southern and northern border. President Trump's a strong president. This administration has not forced these countries to take them back. And we have what we call a third safe country. We already have countries talking about taking back people from other countries. If for instance, Venezuela don't want to take their people back, there's other ways we can do it. There's other countries be willing to accept them. We're hoping that President Trump will work with Venezuela and like he did with Mexico and El Salvador and get these countries taken back. If they don't, they're still going to be deported. They're just going to be deported to a different country. We're not going to be held up on removing public safety threats in this country. We got to put the safety of the American people first. We've had too many young women murdered and raped and burned alive by members of Venezuelan gangs. They need to be a priority under this administration. They're going to be a priority starting day one, and they will be deported.
We will stay tuned for the details. Border Czar Tom Homan, thank you for your time.
Fantastic news. Fantastic news. Absolutely fantastic. They will be deported. No ifs, ands, or buts about it, folks. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. They will be deported.
This Sunday, rising threats. The country is on edge after a deadly New Year's Day terror attack that investigators say was inspired by ISIS.
This was an act of terrorism. It was premeditated and an evil act.
Plus, the new majority as Republicans in Congress prepare to advance Donald Trump's legislative priorities. I'll talk to the new Senate Majority Leader, Republican John Thune of South Dakota. How would you describe your relationship with President-elect Trump right now?
Well, you know what? It's
minority. I'll speak to Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer of New York and California Senator Adam Schiff. Joining me for insight and analysis are NBC News Managing Washington Editor Carol Lee, Jonathan Martin of Politico, Simone Sanders Townsend, former chief spokeswoman for Vice President Kamala Harris, and Mark Short, former chief of staff to Vice President Mike Pence. Welcome to Sunday. It's Meet the Press.
From NBC News in Washington, the longest-running show in television history, this is Meet the Press with Kristen Welker.
Good Sunday morning. On this first weekend of 2025, the nation is on edge after deadly New Year's attacks in New Orleans and Las Vegas. Federal officials are on high alert about potential security threats as Washington prepares for a series of key public events, the certification of the 2024 election on Monday, President Jimmy Carter's state funeral on Thursday at the National Cathedral, and in just 15 days, President-elect Trump's inauguration. President Biden with an emotional message to the victims' families of that tragedy in Louisiana.
To all the families of those who were killed,
to all those who are injured, to all the people of New Orleans who are grieving today, I want you to know I grieve with you. Our nation grieves with you. We're going to stand with you as you mourn and as you heal.
Now, according to the FBI, the New Orleans attacker, a U.S. citizen and Army veteran from Texas who was inspired by ISIS to kill 14 people, had planned to use a transmitter to detonate 2 explosives he had placed near the site of the Bourbon Street attack. Top law enforcement officials have warned the ongoing war in the Middle East has increased the threat of terror attacks inside the United States.
At a time when the terrorism threat was already elevated, the ongoing war in the Middle East has raised the threat of an attack against Americans inside the United States to a whole nother level.
We have been warning for quite some time now, both the
Shaquille O'Neal. What's up, Shaquille?
Community, that we are in a heightened threat environment from malign foreign actors, including, in particular, ISIS.
Oh, this guy's a dirtbag.
All of this comes as the 119th Congress convened on Friday, narrowly re-electing House Speaker Mike Johnson to lead the razor-thin Republican majority after he and President-elect Trump persuaded several initial holdouts. I sat down with the first new Senate Republican leader in 18 years, Majority Leader John Thune. Senate Majority Leader Thune, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thanks, Tristan. Great to be with you.
It is great to have you. Unfortunately, we have to start on this devastating news out of New Orleans, this terror attack. You have now been briefed. It claimed 14 lives. What is the latest information that you have about the investigation?
Well, horrible news, obviously, and our hearts and prayers go out to all of the victims' families, those who are still injured, praying for their recovery. But what a horrible way to start the new year. And it points to the need to get the answers and to make sure it doesn't happen again. And I think that as more information comes out and the investigation is more fully completed, I think we'll have more of those answers. But, clearly it's a dangerous world. And I think it's a reminder that we need to be doing everything we can at every level to keep the American people safe.
You know, you said in your statement after the horrific attack in New Orleans that the threat posed by ISIS, quote, is a clear example of why the Senate must get President Trump's national security team in place as quickly as possible. As you know, there are Senate Republicans who say they still have questions about the qualifications, about the character of some of President-elect Trump's picks, from Pete Hegseth to Tulsi Gabbard. As we sit here today, are you prepared to vote yes on all of his nominees?
Well, it's a process, and we're gonna. What I've promised them is a fair process, and so these nominees are going to go through a committee where they get a lot. They're going to have to answer questions. There will be some hard questions posed. We're going to do everything we can to ensure that he has the people he wants in place. I think you give great deference and latitude to a president when it comes to people he wants to put into key positions. And national security ones are especially important. But the Senate has a role, advice and consent. And we have a lot of our senators who take that role very seriously. And so we will make sure that these nominees have a process, a fair process, in which they have an opportunity to make their cases not only to the members of the committee and ultimately to the full Senate, but also to the American people. And that's underway as we speak. But my hope and expectation is that the president will get the people that he wants in place to implement his agenda.
And I hear you say there's a process, but you're not prepared to say you're a yes, you're a rubber stamp on all of these nominees at this point.
Well, that's why we have a process. And, I've met with them. There are some of them I think that I've been really, really impressed by. And I think there are, as they go through the process, there will be opportunities throughout that where senators will have opportunities to make sure they're getting their questions answered. And we'll see. I mean, I think this is again, that's why we have the checks and balances in our system that we have. But my expectation is, and as the leader in the Senate, that we're going to get the president, his people, as quickly as possible in the key positions where he wants them.
Let me ask you about Kash Patel. In his book, as you know, as has been reported, he has a list of 60 people he calls members of the so-called deep state. Are you certain that Kash Patel's priorities would be fighting crime, protecting national security, rather than settling political scores?
I think that he understands what his mission would be if he is successful.
So now getting rid of crime and corruption within the FBI is just settling political scores? Man, these people are sick and twisted.
And getting confirmed to that position at the FBI. The FBI is an agency that I think is in need of reform and needs a good makeover, so to speak, and probably a good amount of house cleaning when it comes to just the perception the American people have of it. And these institutions that the American people need to have confidence and trust in, I think that confidence and trust is largely eroded. And there's an opportunity to fix that. I think that's what I sat down and met with him. I think he understands that's the mission. And if he's successful through the nomination process, I hope that he will take very seriously that responsibility and focus on what he can do to make the FBI operate in a way that is protecting the American people and also being accountable to the same.
When you say you think he does understand the mission, does that mean, yes, you do think he will put national security ahead of settling political scores?
Well, in my conversations with him, and I've not talked a lot about the meetings that I've had, but I felt like he fully understood, I think, what is expected, and I think what the president wants out of the agency. I feel confident that he gets what his job is going to be if he gets over there. And I think that as he goes through the process, more members will have an opportunity to ask the questions of him. But I think at least based on my conversations with him, I feel very good about that.
Are you a yes on Kash Patel?
Well, I'm not, I haven't been advertising or disclosing my positions on individual nominees at this point just yet. But my job is to make sure they get a fair process. And so I intend to do that, and I think that's underway.
And let's talk about the Republicans' agenda. Yeah. When I spoke with President-elect Donald Trump, he said that his mass deportation plan was his top priority. He wants to deport everyone who is here illegally. Do you support that plan to deport everyone who is here illegally?
Well, I think there are certainly there are categories, people who have committed crimes. There are over 1 million people that the current administration had targeted for deportation. And so I think that we have to take seriously the fact that there are a lot of people in this country today, over 10 million, who've come in just in the last 4 years under this administration's policies, many of whom are not here for good reasons. I mean, we know we've apprehended almost 300 people at the southern border. They're on the terrorist watch list. And you've got criminals and cartel members and gang members and all of the above. So I think that as we think about what those next steps are, the first thing is securing that border and making sure that we change the incentive structure so people are incentivized to come here illegally, which they have been for the past 4 years, and that we do everything to ensure that the border personnel, the ICE agents and border agents have the resources that they need to do their job. Now, some of that means physical barriers, some of it means technological barriers, et cetera. And those are all going to require resources, and then some is going to require deportation of certain people who are here illegally. How that gets translated into actual policy and action will be a function of the new Border Czar and Homeland Security Department Secretary, who will be our Governor.
And of course, it's incredibly complicated. You need 24 more times ICE detention capacity just to deport 1 million people in 1 year, not to mention more agents, more judges, more planes for deportation. In 2016, you actually said deporting everyone here illegally wasn't realistic. Have you changed your mind about that? Do you think it's realistic?
I think you've got... Again, I think you start, and I think this is going to be obviously a process, and it's going to take resources, obviously, to get people, to leave the country.
Hey, guys, it's not realistic that we would convict every single rapist and murderer. It's not realistic that we would convict every single murderer. Therefore, I guess we should just not do it, huh? I guess just not do it. It's going to be hard to get all of them, so I guess we just shouldn't do it. That's the Democrat thinking right there.
We're going to have to make sure the administration has the resources they need to enable them to do that. Is it realistic to deport everybody? I mean, there's a lot of people in this country who are here illegally, but I think we have
who cares? We still need to deport them all.
Already, and I said anybody who has committed a crime in this country clearly ought to be on that list. And there are a bunch of folks that over 1.4 million, I think, on the current administration's list of people that need to be deported. So start with that, and then we'll go from there and figure it out. But I think that the administration, when they take office, these are decisions, obviously, they're going to have to make, and we want to work with them to ensure that we have a safe and secure southern border where people don't have the incentive structure they have today, which is essentially come to this country and we will wave you in. People have to understand that we are a nation of immigrants, but we are first and foremost a nation of laws, and you got to follow the law.
Let's talk about tax cuts. President-elect Trump has proposed a slew of tax cuts, extending the 2017 tax cuts, as well as further slashing the corporate rate, eliminating taxes on tips. The estimated price for everything he's proposing would exceed some $9 trillion. Are you comfortable adding $9 trillion to the national debt?
Well, I think you have to, first off, look at what happens if we don't act by the end of the year. And that's a $4 trillion tax increase on the American people, because that's essentially what you're talking about if we don't extend the 2017 tax law. The president has had some other suggestions and ideas with respect to, that he would like to do in the area of tax reform, and we'll take those into consideration. But I think that we intend to ensure that we don't have a $4 trillion tax increase on the American people by December 31 of this year. And in order to do that, we've got to act collectively, House, Senate, and White House, to extend the 2017 tax cuts. Now, in doing that, I believe there will also be a robust conversation about whether we can find offsets and achieve reductions in spending that would help offset some of that. But then also, you've got to understand, too, that tax policy is directly connected to economic growth. And we've been told by all the experts, the Joint Committee on Taxation, Congressional Budget Office, that for every 1% increase in GDP, you generate about $3 trillion in additional tax revenue. Many of the tax provisions that are in law today that will be extended will have a very positive impact on growth in the economy. I'm somebody who believes in growth. With growth, you get better paying jobs, but you also generate more tax revenue. And I think that's something that isn't fully contemplated or considered when people talk about deficit numbers.
You've said that the size of the national debt is actually a national security threat. You're talking about the 2017 tax cuts, but when you lump all of these other potential tax cuts onto it, it just balloons the debt. How would you pay for that? I hear you expressing some skepticism that the whole entire package could get done. Well, I mean, I think that you start with extending existing tax policy. And that is current policy. Now, some people, depending on which scorekeepers you use, will say, well, yes, this is going to contribute to deficits down the road. But the fact of the matter is, this is the law today. And so what you're doing is essentially extending that. Well, I'm not perhaps all of it, but what I'm telling you is a combination of growth, a combination of offsets, and an expectation, I think, that if you want to avoid a $4 trillion tax increase, you're going to have to take some steps to extend the current tax policy. When you do that, I think you get outcomes that are good for the economy. And when the economy is growing, expanding, and creating better paying jobs, people are making money, they're taking realizations, they're paying taxes, tax revenues go up. And that was demonstrated and proven in 2017 with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Monday marks 4 years since January 6th, since the attack on the Capitol. You were here that day. You've been in this building for more than 20 years. In my interview with him, President-elect Trump said he plans to pardon those who attacked the Capitol on that day, and potentially even some of those who pleaded guilty to assaulting police officers. Do you support that, pardoning people who attacked police officers who stormed the Capitol that day?
Well, I mean, as we've discovered under the Biden administration, the pardon authority is a very broad one. I mean, he's taken it to a whole new level. That's ultimately going to be a decision that President Trump is going to have to make. And, what I'm focused on is the future, and not looking in the rearview mirror, but looking in the windshield and what we have to do. I think you learn from the past, you remember the past, but you live in the present and the future. And right now, we have an agenda which consists of a stronger, more robust economy, energy dominance, rebuilding our national security and securing our border. Those are things that we want to get done, which I think the American people voted on in November and gave President Trump a very decisive victory. And I think the expectation is that we're going to work with him to accomplish that agenda.
As the majority leader in the Senate, though, what message do you think it would send to give pardons to people who pleaded guilty to attacking police officers who stormed the this building 4 years ago?
Well, look, I mean, again, it's ultimately going to be a decision that the President of the United States, the pardon authority exists with him. My job right now is to help the President get the people into the positions that he wants to implement his agenda, and then work constructively with him, with the House of Representatives, on an agenda that we think is what the American people voted for. And that, you know, you can't be looking in the rearview mirror to do that. You know, that's 4 years ago. I think the American people are living in the present, and I think they want the work that we're doing to be done with an eye toward what we can do to improve their lives today.
President-elect Trump told me he is open to doing a deal with Democrats to protect Dreamers, those who were brought here illegally as children. Do you commit to working with Democrats to try to get a deal on the Dreamers?
Well, if the President of the United States, he's obviously going to lead on a lot of this policy with respect to the border. But that is an issue that I think on which there could be some bipartisan cooperation. In the past, at least,
I'm not supporting that 1 second.
Conversations around if you get the right things with respect.
Endorsed Tim Scott during the Republican primary. You ultimately backed Mr. Trump. How would you describe your relationship with President-elect Trump right now?
Well, you know what? It's evolving. And we have a relationship, I think, where we understand what each other wants to accomplish. And what I said before is, you know, that there is an alignment of incentives. We want to get to the same destination. I want a lot of the same thing to accomplish the same things that he does. And I think that's a powerful combination, and we're going to continue to build on that.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Kristen.
And when we come back, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer joins me
That's
next.
all they talk about, guests. That's all they talk about is January 6th. This entire Sunday has been nothing but January 6th stuff.
Welcome back. And joining me now is the Senate Minority Leader, Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer of New York. Leader Schumer, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Kristen, good to be back, and Happy New Year to you and your family and to all of America.
Oh, Happy New Year to you. Thank you so much for being here on this first Sunday of the new year. I do want to start off by getting your insights into the attack in New Orleans. As you know, a lot of families are sitting at home. They feel afraid. They feel on edge. There are a lot of big events coming up, from the inauguration to the Super Bowl, which is going to be in New Orleans. What are the security gaps that you think need to be addressed?
Well, first, I want to express my condolences to the families who are in mourning for the loved ones who were lost in New Orleans. We grieve for them. I also, you know, the former soldier, member of the armed forces, who had PTSD and committed suicide in front of the Las Vegas hotel, showed, I think, that we need to do more for our veterans who have PTSD and other things there. As for, look, terrorism is a greater threat here in America. We have ISIS, we have other groups. The terrorist who rammed his car and killed so many people was a professed member of ISIS. Now, we do not know. We know that he acted alone. We don't know if ISIS directed him to do it. They're still investigating. But we need to be very, very vigilant. And so I sent a letter yesterday to John Thune suggesting we have an all-senators briefing this week on the preparations for the big events that are coming up, and for the ability to ask questions of our law enforcement. I believe they are on top of this, but having an all-senators hearing and giving us a chance to answer questions and them to reply is a good thing. So I'm hopeful Senator Thune and I can work that out and get it done this week.
All right. Well, I know that you're going to continue to watch that closely. I do want to turn to how you see Democrats' role in this new Congress. Your fellow Democratic Congressman colleague, Tom Suozzi, said the party needs to try a different approach when it comes to dealing with President-elect Trump. Let me read you a little bit of what he had to say. He said, "I know my party will be tempted to hold fast against Mr. Trump at every turn. That would be a mistake. Only by working together to find compromise on parts of the president-elect's agenda can we make progress for Americans." Do you agree with Congressman Suozzi that Democrats need a new approach toward President-elect Trump?
Well, look, I think it's clear that whenever we can get things done in a bipartisan way, we try to do it. And that's the best way to go. It creates programs that are long-lasting and very popular. So back in 2021-22, when we had the most successful session of the Senate, of the Congress, in decades, 7 of the 8 major bills were done in a bipartisan way. So we always look for bipartisan cooperation and would welcome the ability. On the other hand, when there are things that we can't agree with, for instance, tax breaks for the wealthiest of Americans paid for, as many Republicans have suggested, by cuts in Social Security and in Medicare and in making it harder for new families to buy their first home, they're going to have to go through us. We're going to oppose those kinds of things very.
It's like, what a complete lie.
Very rigorously. So I think we will be bipartisan when we can, but we also, when they're trying to do things, our Republican colleagues that are so bad for working people, will oppose them.
Leader Schumer, I'm curious where you see those potential areas. In my interview with President-elect Trump, he said he's open to potentially getting a deal for Dreamers, those who were brought to the country illegally as children, to be able to stay here permanently. Do you think that that is feasible? You heard Leader Thune say, yes, he thinks there are some areas of bipartisanship there. Do you think a deal on Dreamers is possible?
Well, we'd love to do that. Our party has been strongly fighting for the Dreamers for a decade. We've been blocked by our colleagues on the other side of the aisle. If there's going to be a change and we can get some help, look, these are people, they were little tiny children when they were brought over the border. Many of them have been here for decades. Some have served in the armed forces. Many of them are working very productively and have families. And yes, if we can find a solution so that the Dreamers could stay here, we'd welcome it.
You know, you heard Leader Thune in terms of President-elect Trump's cabinet say that the Senate should work, quote, as quickly as possible to get his cabinet picks in place, and basically saying that if his national security picks are not in place quickly, that could undermine.
All right, guys, I can't deal with the mainstream media or this Democrat hack, and I definitely am not going to be able to handle Adam Schiff. Just the lies and stuff. I just won't be able to do it. So I'm going to get off. I'm going to go eat dinner, shower. I will be back on. Probably going to do another gaming stream later. Thank you guys for